Chapter 52. Just now, that person mentioned the top 10 experts. What's going on? Ren Bachin asked another question. I heard that it was arranged by someone from Great Xia. Anyway, we don't care about this, Caretaker Shi replied casually. They didn't care, but Ren Bachin was very interested. Who arranged it? Which top 10 experts are they? Who else does Dayo have? I don't know who did it, but someone did it and then the news spread. I only knew about it because they would shout like that every time they came. Caretaker Shi sneered. It was obvious that he was very disdainful of these people's loud shouts that startled the entire city every time they came. However, Ren Bachin felt that he was unhappy with the fact that the other party's voice was louder than his. It said that His Majesty is ranked 7th, and the general who supports the nation, Hongwu, is ranked 9th. I'm not sure about the rest, but most of them are from Great Xia. There's one from the Yun nation and one from the Qin nation. Ren Bachin was overwhelmed with emotions as he listened. Which youngster didn't dream of becoming an expert? He had also been that age. Although he felt that he could only dream of becoming a peerless master, he could still shout 666 from the side. Even so, Ren Bachin was still very interested in the level of martial arts in this world. He didn't know if there was any mysterious chi or something like that. The two of them moved forward along with the crowd. When they passed by Beihong district, they could see that many of the mansions of the court officials on both sides of the street had their doors open. A few burly men were standing on stools looking forward. He could already see the palace walls when he raised his head. However, there were too many people, so he couldn't see where the challenger was. Many people stopped outside the square in front of the palace. However, with a group of burly men standing in front of him, Ren Bachin couldn't see anything. After jumping a few times, he finally saw a lone person standing in the square in front of the palace. Excuse me, Ren Bachin said as he tried to squeeze his way forward. However, he was pushed back by someone's butt. Damn it! Ren Bachin cursed. Just as Ren Bachin was hesitating whether he should shout out, "You pooped in your pants," the row of soldiers standing on top of the palace wall neatly parted to both sides. Soon after, a lady dressed in red appeared. Your Majesty. Yes, Your Majesty. The surrounding people shouted one after another. Their voices gathered together and soared into the sky. It seemed like this empress was quite loved and respected by the people. It seems like Her Majesty is not in a good mood today, Caretaker Shi said. How do you know? Ren Bachin was curious. If Her Majesty is in a good mood, she won't bother with people who come to challenge her, Caretaker Shi said. Ren Bachin pondered for a long time. Did this mean that the empress would vent her anger on them when she was in a bad mood and ignore them when she was in a good mood? Ren Bachin remembered Caretaker Shi mentioning that all the challengers last year were beaten to death. None of them survived. In other words, none of them came with the empress in a good mood? Was he too unlucky, or did the empress have too many bad moods? It was understandable that she was in a bad mood for 2 or 3 days a month, but she couldn't be in a bad mood every day, right? At the thought of this, Ren Bachin felt a chill on the back of his neck. Fortunately, he had not been executed the last few times he entered the palace. His luck was not bad. When the figure in front of the crowd saw the empress appear at the top of the city wall, he immediately raised his voice and said, Qi Xiao, although you are the ruler of a nation, you are also one of the top 10 experts in the world. I Long Wanli, as a martial artist, have come to seek guidance from you. Please do not be stingy. Arrogant. How dare you shout the empress's name? Someone in the crowd immediately scolded. How can you challenge the empress whenever you want? You have to get past me first. A burly man strode out from the crowd with a huge saber in his hand. Me too. Both of you are too weak, let me do it. Do you want to test the sharpness of my saber? The burly man with the saber immediately glared back at him. He thought to himself that this sentence that he had just learned was indeed imposing. A few generals in the imperial court stepped forward one after another. After exchanging a few words, they started to undermine each other. Long Wanli was indifferent to the scolding and noise behind him. His gaze was fixed on the figure in red on top of the palace wall. At the same time, his aura was constantly rising. Before he came here, he had already challenged 19 experts and won all of them in one battle. His aura was at its sharpest. Some of the experts who were on his path of challenge avoided him one after another. Seeing this situation, he rode straight to the southwest and challenged one of the top 10 experts in the world when he was at his peak. He was also the one who was most likely to fight with him. As for the others, their whereabouts were uncertain, or they were in the midst of a large army. On the contrary, even though the empress was an empress, she had fought many times. In order to prevent the other party from refusing to fight, she specially challenged him as a martial artist. At this moment his fighting spirit was soaring and his aura was at its peak. Even those who were closer to him could feel the piercingly cold aura emitted from his body. It was as if he was an unparalleled sharp sword. With just one look, one could feel that his sharpness was unstoppable. Many people were affected by his aura and took a step back one after another. Even Rinpoche could feel the sharpness coming from the front. It was as if a saber was right in front of him, giving him a fright. What is this? Aura, fighting spirit, sword intent, who knows what it's called? Caretaker sure replied indifferently. Anyway, it's that thing. Rinpoche composed himself. Even though he was in the crowd and the other party's back was facing him, he still felt that as long as the other party willed it, he could lose his life at any time. This feeling of being on the brink of death was really terrible. It was so terrible that he couldn't help but touch the stun baton even though he knew that it was useless. The Empress, who was dressed in red, stood on top of the city gate tower and looked down. The corner of her mouth twitched slightly and she hooked her finger downwards. If it was somewhere else and such a woman hooked her finger at them, many people would definitely let their imaginations run wild. However, at this moment, everyone present could feel a domineering aura emanating from the Empress. She can't even be bothered to talk to you. Come do it. Long Wanli's aura had already reached its peak. He was just waiting for the Empress's response. At this moment, the sword on his back was unsheathed with a clang sound and fell into his hand. His entire body transformed into a bolt of lightning and pierced towards the Empress. Everyone could feel his indomitable determination. Awesome and otherworldly fairy. Rinpoche could finally see clearly and was immediately amazed. He didn't know if it was the legendary man and sword become one, but at this moment the feeling that Long Wanli gave him was that he and his sword had become one. His entire body was emitting an endless sword intent. And this sword really made him feel as if it had flown from the heavens. Even Rinpoche was worried for the Empress on the palace wall. Although the Empress was indeed an expert, Rinpoche usually felt that she was a little aloof and had a somewhat oppressive aura. He didn't feel the Empress's strength at all. Therefore, when he saw this sword that seemed to have come from the heavens, Rinpoche couldn't help but feel a little worried. Facing this world-shocking sword, the Empress's expression didn't change at all. When the tip of the sword was directly in front of her, she stretched out her lily-white hand and lightly flicked it. Clang. A crisp sound was heard. The tip of the sword flew straight up into the sky. When the remaining half of the sword was also deflected, the lily-white hand directly imprinted on Long Wanli's chest. Immediately he flew back at a speed faster than when he came. Just as Rinpoche exclaimed in surprise, the other party flew back at a speed faster than when he left. Bang! Immediately, gravel flew everywhere and dust filled the air. After a long time, when the dust had settled, a large pit appeared on the stone-paved ground. Long Wanli was already dead and all the bones in his body were broken. When the dust settled, the situation in the field was revealed. And the figure of the Empress on the palace wall had already disappeared. The crowd took a look and immediately dispersed with a hubbub. I thought he would be able to make one more move this time. I didn't expect him to die in one move. However, I finally got to see Her Majesty in action today. This guy is really too weak. I was looking forward to it for so long. Chapter 53. That's it. As soon as Rinpoche finished speaking, he felt someone fall to the side, almost pressing him to the ground. Caretaker Sure? What happened to you? Rinpoche held onto Caretaker Sure and asked in astonishment. Just now, Caretaker Sure was still fine. Why did he suddenly become like this? Caretaker Sure's face trembled. He was speechless for a long time. You got a heart attack because you were too excited just now? Or cerebral infarction? Rinpoche was a little anxious. Caretaker Sure was a good person. He did not want to see anything happen to him. However, upon closer inspection, Caretaker Sure did not look like he was suffering from a heart attack or cerebral infarction. Caretaker Sure was also fine. He was just glaring at Rinpoche with his face twitching. Looking at him, it looked like he had been electrocuted. Rinpoche was shocked when he thought of this. He lowered his head and saw that the stun baton was in his hand. He had subconsciously taken it out after being shocked by that person's imposing manner. Don't tell me I pressed the button and poked Caretaker Sure's body when I was nervous? At the thought of this, he looked at Caretaker Sure's condition again. The more he looked, the more he felt that he had been electrocuted by Professor Yang. Rinpoche stuffed the stun baton back to his waist and hurriedly helped Caretaker Sure to sit at the side with an awkward expression on his face. After a long while, Caretaker Sure finally recovered. He looked at Rinpoche as if he had seen a ghost and asked, What did you poke my thigh with just now? A slip of the hand, a slip of the hand. Ren Bachin laughed dryly. Just now he and Caretaker Shi were standing right next to each other. It was impossible for him to deny it even if he wanted to. What exactly is it? Caretaker Shi glared at Ren Bachin. This. Ren Bachin laughed dryly and waved the stun baton in front of Caretaker Shi. He did not expect Caretaker Shi to snatch it away. What is this? Just now his whole body was numb and he couldn't move at all. I can't even exert any strength now. Caretaker Shi fiddled with the electric baton with a curious look on his face. Although the electric baton was made of plastic, in his eyes, it was already very well made. My sect's secret treasure, the stun baton, Ren Bachin blurted out. You have a master? Caretaker Shi was surprised. This is the first time I've heard you say that. Ren Bachin didn't continue the conversation. He wouldn't be able to continue the conversation as it was originally a joke. How do I use this thing? Caretaker Shi continued to fiddle with the electric baton when he saw that Ren Bachin did not answer him. Press the button? As soon as Ren Bachin finished speaking, his entire body started trembling. Then he directly fell to the ground. He finally knew what it felt like to be electrocuted. His entire body was numb and in pain. His stomach felt like it was on fire and he felt nauseous. This feeling was indeed refreshing. In his heart, he wanted to cry but had no tears. Sure enough, as the saying goes, a jar will not break without leaving the well, and a general will not die without leaving the horse. He had only been carrying this electric baton for a day, and he was already in trouble. Caretaker Shi lifted Ren Bachin's neck and placed him at his side. After playing with the electric baton for a while with a cheerful look on his face, he self-consciously tucked it into his waist. Brother Ren, I treat you well, right? I'll play with this thing and pass it to you in a few days, Caretaker Shi nagged beside Ren Bachin. Ren Bachin felt that he had encountered bandits. Caretaker Shi took about 5 minutes to recover from the electric shock, while Ren Bachin took about 15 minutes to recover. Furthermore, Caretaker Shi only touched his body briefly before withdrawing the electric baton. When Ren Bachin could finally move, Caretaker Shi patted his butt and stood up. He had a carefree look on his face. He did not hold a grudge against Ren Bachin for poking him with the electric baton previously. Ren Bachin got up from the ground and moved his arms and legs. He looked at the electric baton at Caretaker Shi's waist and weighed the difference in size between him and Caretaker Shi. He decided to buy a few more as backup after he returned. At this moment, a group of soldiers in front of the plaza were filling the huge pit with soil. When Ren Bachin was placed at the side by Caretaker Shi, he could see the plaza. It seemed that no one had carried that person out. They actually buried him with soil. This made Ren Bachin feel rather horrified. This act of destroying the corpse and destroying the evidence was too open and aboveboard. However, looking at the momentum of that person flying upside down and crashing onto the ground, he reckoned that even Astro Boy would be smashed into pieces, let alone a human body. Ren Bachin had a deep understanding of the Empress's strength. She was definitely at the level of a Tyrannosaurus in human form. He did not know how she could be so powerful at her age. At the same time, he felt that it was a pity. That Long Wanli had a pretty good appearance. He was dressed in a green robe. Even though he could not see his face, he could feel that he was an elegant person just by looking at his back view. In particular, his sword was like a flying immortal. It was a pity that he was killed with a single slap. Now, even his corpse was buried under the plaza. Why didn't you move the corpse to another place for burial? Ren Bachin asked. He felt awkward about burying corpses under the plaza. Why? Burying the enemy's corpses under the ground will strengthen the fate of Dayo, Caretaker Shi said. He had to admit that this was the difference between the cultures of the two worlds. On Earth, if there were corpses buried under the ground, people would feel uncomfortable. But here they felt that it could strengthen the fate of Dayo. This made Ren Bachin speechless. Will someone come to take revenge? Ren Bachin asked again. Just bury them together. Caretaker Shi laughed mischievously. He was completely unconcerned about Ren Bachin's question. Not long after the two of them returned to the Beast Park, Ren Bachin was summoned to the palace. The person who came to summon him was an acquaintance, Shi Hu. He had met him a few times before. I want to present this to Her Majesty, Ren Bachin said as he patted the air cooler. What is this? Shi Hu was puzzled. Ren Bachin pulled the cord of the air cooler. As the fan rotated, wind immediately blew out. Shi Hu looked at it curiously and said, It's much more convenient than using a fan. Naturally, Ren Bachin replied. Even though this thing wasn't very advanced and wasn't complicated to make, it was a new and interesting way of thinking that the ancients didn't have. Furthermore, the wind was natural, and the duration of the air cooler was much better than using a fan. Rinpoche carried the air cooler and followed Sherhu into the palace. They went straight to the imperial kitchen. "I'll go back and report to Her Majesty. She might summon you later," Sherhu said to Rinpoche before leaving. "Thank you." Rinpoche smiled. After entering the imperial kitchen, Rinpoche placed the air cooler at one side. A few cooks saw something novel and wanted to study it. However, they were all kicked away by Rinpoche. Everyone laughed and didn't seem to mind. Even though the people of Dayo had violent tendencies, they were rather straightforward after acknowledging him. They didn't mind some jokes. This made Rinpoche feel that they were pretty good. They were much easier to deal with than the people of the modern world. Even though they had only interacted a few times after taking out those seasonings and making a few new dishes, the cooks in the imperial kitchen had acknowledged Rinpoche wholeheartedly. If not for Her Majesty saying that she had other arrangements for Rinpoche, caretaker Go would have wanted to transfer him to the imperial kitchen. Braised dragon scale fish. Rinpoche was sure that this was a carp with 2 extra whiskers. After it was done, Rinpoche tasted it. There wasn't any fishy smell at all. It melted in his mouth and was fresh and fragrant. He made up his mind to go to the market to buy a few more. Even if it was expensive, the taste was worth it. Sweet and sour pork, mushu pork and white fungus soup. After finishing the 4 dishes, Rinpoche went to take a rest. Even though the cooks in the imperial kitchen were in charge of making the dishes and he was in charge of mouthing them. Not long after the dishes were served, Sherhu came to the imperial kitchen to look for Rinpoche. "Her Majesty summons you in. Bring your box." Chapter 54. Me, that's a good thing. It means it's going to be popular. I didn't expect my book review section to be flooded one day. I'm a little excited just thinking about it. Once it's popular, I can get a new wife. Everyone knows that people don't necessarily say anything when they're in a daze. Especially when I wrote an old book until 4 in the morning and only slept for 3 hours. Chapter 55. Rinpoche carried the box into the main hall. The Empress was wearing a red muslin dress with a white undergarment underneath. Her hair was simply tied up at the back of her head and she was concentrating on her dinner. It was as if she did not see Rinpoche coming in. Rinpoche could only stand there and wait with the box in his arms. After the incident in the afternoon, Rinpoche's impression of the Empress changed greatly when he saw her again. Previously he only felt that this Empress was of noble status. Even though she could send a polar bear flying with a slap, Rinpoche was rather surprised. However, after seeing the brute force of the Dayo people, Rinpoche was somewhat used to it. But today, after that so-called expert who came out of nowhere to challenge him, the Empress had already risen to the level of a humanoid Tyrannosaurus in his heart, second only to a Super Saiyan. Today, Rinpoche obediently stood there with his head lowered. He did not even lift his head and stared at the box as he entered the main hall. This box looked much more beautiful under the illumination of the lanterns. The galaxy on the box was glowing with starlight. After the Empress finished her dinner, she said, "Today's dinner dishes are not bad. Cook the same dishes tomorrow." Her voice was cold. "Yes." Caretaker Go bowed and took away the dinner. "Come up. Why are you so well behaved today?" The Empress's cold voice sounded. Previously, even though he clearly knew that the Empress was in front of him, even though he clearly knew that accompanying a monarch was like accompanying a tiger, but since he came from the real world, Rinpoche still had many habits that were hard to change, such as looking around and so on. Usually, when he was telling a story as the story progressed, he would often make all kinds of hand gestures, which made the Empress feel rather amused. Dayo itself did not pay much attention to etiquette, so she did not feel that he was being rude. Therefore, when she saw him looking downwards and being so well behaved today, the Empress felt that it was a little strange. Rinpoche hurriedly said, "I was just thinking that your Majesty's martial arts are matchless and your might is world-shaking. Today this kind of rascal actually dared to challenge your Majesty. He is really overestimating himself. He came all the way to Dayo just to let your Majesty display your exceptional martial arts to deter the rascal. At the same time, he can relax from handling state affairs and worrying about the people. From this point of view, he has succeeded and is considered to have made a contribution to Dayo. I wonder if his contributions to Dayo should be recorded in the annals of history." Qing Yuan and Hong Luan, who were behind the Empress, covered their mouths and giggled softly. They looked at Rinpoche with interest. Not only did he know how to tell stories, but he was also very funny when he spoke. The corner of the Empress's mouth curled up slightly, but she immediately retracted it. Rinpoche guessed that she should be in a good mood at this moment. It seemed that ever since his previous attempt at bootlicking failed miserably, his painstaking research had finally yielded some results. He felt slightly proud of himself. He still had some potential in this area. Following which, he carried the box and walked to the bottom of the stone steps. The Empress raised her head and saw the dark blue box that was decorated with galaxies. She was very interested and asked, "Is this what you want to present to me? What is it?" At the mention of the box in his hands, Rinpoche became more spirited. He raised his head and said, "This is an air cooler." The weather was scorching hot now. Ordinary people were like this, not to mention the Empress who was in the palace handling the affairs of Dayo every day and working hard for the welfare of millions of people. After much consideration, I specially made this air cooler to present to your majesty. Following which, he took 2 steps forward and placed the box not far from the Empress. He said, "Your Majesty, I have been impolite. I still need some crushed ice and half a basin of water." "Jing Yuan." "Hong Yuan," the Empress called out softly. Immediately, the maid from before nodded at Rinpoche and went to fetch the water. Another maid then placed the basin of ice beside Rinpoche's hand. Rinpoche opened the lid, added the ice and water in succession, and then covered the lid. After a while, he reckoned that the ice water should have soaked through the cloth. He directly pulled the string on top of the fan. Immediately, the cold air was blown to the Empress's body along with the wind. The Empress let out a soft cry of surprise. She took 2 steps forward with great interest. Feeling the cold wind blowing on her body, she squinted her eyes, which appeared somewhat long and narrow. She had a satisfied look on her face. At this moment, her expression didn't make her look so heroic. After squinting her long and narrow eyes, she looked a little more gentle and charming. Her entire person looked beautiful and alluring. However, this was only for a moment. The Empress took a few steps forward again. She was separated from Rinpoche by a box. Rinpoche could even smell the fragrance coming from her body. His mind was slightly stirred and he immediately restrained his mind. Rinpoche felt that he was about to become an old monk sitting still. The Empress opened the lid and looked at the structure inside. Then, she turned around and returned to the couch with a trace of a rare gentle smile on her face. "If you put this thing a little further in, it would be rather cool to use. You are very considerate. Thank you for your praise, your Majesty." Rinpoche lowered his head. "Well, continue with your story," the Empress said while lying on the couch. "Yes." Rinpoche began to narrate the story while the Empress listened attentively while lying on the couch. As Rinpoche narrated the story, the Empress didn't have any expression. However, the eyes of Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan lit up. Obviously, both of them were extremely interested in this story. Their mood also fluctuated along with the fate of each character in the story. After listening for a long time, the Empress waved her hand and asked, "Is there any other story?" After all, from her point of view, all those schemes and stratagems were nothing more than a sword. Those so-called valiant generals were equivalent to the ordinary soldiers of Dayo. It was just like listening to a group of ants fighting. At first it was still somewhat fresh, but after a few days it became somewhat boring. Hearing what the Empress said, the 2 maids were slightly disappointed. Both of them felt that this story was pretty good. Rinpoche wasn't engrossed in his storytelling today. He had been paying attention to the Empress. Seeing that she waved her hand, he immediately stopped and nodded his head in agreement. "Since it's like this, let me tell your Majesty about the investiture of the gods," Rinpoche said. Originally, he wanted to talk about the journey to the west, but there were too many things that needed to be explained. It would be better to talk about the investiture of the gods first and then follow up with the journey to the west. "What is it about?" the Empress asked. "It's about the ancient investiture of the gods," Rinpoche replied. He thought that the martial arts level of the investiture of the gods was definitely high enough. The Empress was rather interested and said, "Oh, then let's talk about this." "Yes." Rinpoche opened his mouth and started from Pangu's creation of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors to give the Empress an idea. When he talked about how Su Hu rebelled against the Shang dynasty because he wanted him to offer his daughter, the Empress faintly sighed and said, "Exactly. Wasn't the founding of Dayo because of this?" These words made Rinpoche slightly stunned. He really wasn't clear about what happened before the founding of Dayo. He only knew from Caretaker Shir's words that Dayo was originally made up of aboriginals and was founded 70 years ago. He wasn't clear about the specifics. He wasn't sure if it was because she was reminiscing about the past, but the Empress listened even more attentively. This investiture of the gods was much more interesting to her than the romance of the 3 kingdoms. Especially after Zheng Luan's 2 beams of white light that sucked people's souls, Chong Heihu's vision blurred, and he fell off his horse and was captured by Zheng Luan. This kind of story was extremely interesting to the empress. She said, "These things in China are rather similar to Great Xia. It is said that there are also strange people in Great Xia, but they are rarely seen. Furthermore, China and Great Xia sound similar." Ren Baqin hurriedly said, "China is millions of miles away from Deyo, it's just a coincidence of the names." The empress nodded her head in agreement and continued listening to the story. In the end, after hearing Ji Chang's persuasion and Su Hu's agreement to gift his daughter, she immediately raised her eyebrows and slapped the back of the couch. Immediately, wood splinters flew everywhere and the back of the couch was smashed into pieces by her slap. This Ji Chang's words are better than his singing. First, Su Hu rebelled, then he wanted to gift his daughter. He's neither a minister nor a father, he's hesitant and fickle. Ren Baqin shrunk his neck. This investiture of the gods wasn't written by him, so he couldn't be blamed. He didn't expect her to have such a big reaction when she heard this part. Combined with what the empress said about Su Hu rebelling against the Shang dynasty, Ren Baqin felt that there might be a connection. Presumably, it was related to the reason why the first emperor of Deyo revolted. Chapter 56. Ren Baqin listened to a portion of Romance of the Three Kingdoms and 3 chapters of Investiture of the Gods. The sky was already dark by then. Before leaving the palace, Ren Baqin hesitated whether he should tell the empress about the salt well. However, after thinking about it, he was only 50% confident. If he messed it up, it might affect his value in the empress's heart. In the end, he decided that it would be better to wait until his position was higher before using this method to exchange for credit. If he did it after the sweet potatoes were ripe, even if he failed, the impact wouldn't be too great. Ren Baqin returned to the beast park, found some mutton to eat and went to bed. The next morning he took his camera and walked around the beast park, taking pictures of all the beautiful places. He didn't dare to take pictures of the animals in the beast park. After all, many of them were different from those on Earth. If he took pictures and uploaded them on the internet, it would be too easy to expose himself. Ren Baqin's current situation was that he had to hide his abilities even if he wanted to show off. Thinking about what the empress said last night, Ren Baqin was suddenly interested in the history of Deyo. He went to ask Ting Hulu and Tai Dao. The two of them were guarding a few big wooden basins and resting in a cool place. The basins were filled with animal hides that were being soaked. After hearing Ren Baqin's inquiry, the two of them told him some of the things they knew. Ren Baqin knew that most of the people in Deyo were originally aboriginals. 70 years ago, the Deyo people that Ren Baqin saw now were actually aboriginals, but they were called barbarians by the outside world. They mainly lived in villages scattered in the 60,000 mountains in the west and south of Deyo and made a living by hunting. It was a vast and continuous mountain range that surrounded the west and most of the south of the current Deyo nation. There were countless ferocious beasts and many aboriginal strongholds in the mountain range. There was originally a country on this plain called the Hao Nation. At that time, the Hao Nation had been founded for more than 300 years and was extravagant. The king of the Hao Nation was as licentious as King Zhou of Sham. The aboriginal women were usually strong and had outstanding looks. They were completely different from the weak women of the Hao Nation and had a unique flavor. The Hao Nation's emperor listened to someone and ordered the aboriginals to offer up 100 women. Otherwise he would send troops to attack. Furthermore, the aboriginals were not under the jurisdiction of the Hao Nation. Furthermore, with their bad tempers, they naturally did not care about this matter. They even beat the messenger half dead and threw him down the mountain. The emperor of the Hao Nation was enraged when he received the report and immediately sent out 50,000 troops to suppress them. He also gave the order to annihilate the village and to send the young women back to the capital for him to enjoy. The aboriginals were organized in strongholds, and they didn't have much defense either. 5 strongholds were destroyed on the spot, and the people in the strongholds were all slaughtered while the women were taken away. Furthermore, the Hao Nation's army was still advancing into the forest. It was only at this time that the aboriginals reacted. Their anger spread like wildfire in the mountain range. The aboriginals who heard the news gathered together. However, there wasn't enough time, and the number of people who could gather wasn't too many. Relying on the special characteristics of the mountain forest, they set up layers of interception. After the Hao Nation's army broke through the 3rd layer, they were stopped by the 4th layer and could not advance any further. Both sides had suffered great losses. Although the individual strength of the barbarians was strong, they had lost thousands of people in the face of an army of 50,000. The Hao Nation's army wasn't used to fighting in the forest, so their losses were even greater. Almost 10,000 of them were buried in the forest. At this time, the person who persuaded the Han nation's emperor to conscript the women once again gave him a plan. Why did the Aboriginals dare to disobey the Han nation's emperor? It was because the barbarians hunted, wore animal skins, and picked wild fruits for a living. They didn't need anything from the outside world and could live freely in the forest. The Han nation couldn't send out troops to suppress them. Otherwise, the situation would be the same as now. If the Han nation wanted the barbarians to submit, they had to make it impossible for them to survive in the forest. They had no choice but to obey the Han nation. There was an unknown number of barbarians in the mountain range, but there was one thing that all of them needed: salt. There was a piece of rock salt in the mountain range, and almost all the salt used by the Aboriginals came from there. As long as they poisoned the rock salt, the Aboriginals would have to listen to the Han nation's emperor if they wanted salt. It could be considered as subduing the enemy without a fight. The Han nation's emperor was overjoyed when he heard this and immediately carried out the plan. At the same time, he had another thought. Although the Han nation was strong against the Aboriginals, it was still weaker than the Yun nation and the Chin nation. If he could get the Aboriginals to join the army, it would be very effective in attacking cities and strongholds. In the end, the Aboriginals suffered heavy losses after the salt was poisoned. Half of the stronghold where Dayo nation's first emperor, Yapeng, lived was either dead or injured. After his grief, he immediately contacted the other strongholds to revolt. They bypassed the tens of thousands of soldiers in the forest and launched a sneak attack on a city near the mountain range. Now both sides could be said to have a blood feud. At this time, a person came to seek refuge with Yapeng, saying that the Han nation's emperor destroyed his family and wanted revenge. At first, Yapeng sent people to watch over the other party and guard against him. Later on, when he saw that the other party was sincere in his plans and even destroyed the 40,000 soldiers, Yapeng began to trust him. At this time, the anger of the Aboriginals had subsided a little. After the 40,000 soldiers were destroyed, there was no longer a threat to their survival. However, the rock salt was poisonous and could only be obtained by plundering cities. Therefore, all the strongholds had to unite and plunder. It had to be said that this was the Han nation's emperor's doing. The Aboriginals' losses also started to increase. At this time, that person gave advice to Yapeng. He said that this couldn't go on. They couldn't always rely on plundering to obtain salt. It was better to first occupy a few cities and hold them. Only then would they have the capital to negotiate and obtain salt from the Yun nation and the Chin nation. When Yapeng heard this, he agreed. He then contacted a few strongholds located in the depths of the mountain range. With that person as the military advisor, they went down the mountain to attack the strongholds and occupied 4 cities in a row. As the Han nation's 50,000 soldiers in the southwest had been completely annihilated, the remaining soldiers had to guard the east and north. At the same time, the Han nation's emperor was licentious and tyrannical. There was a rebellion in the region and they had to send troops to suppress it. Furthermore, the Han nation's emperor thought that the barbarians were only robbing some things and that the key was to quell the rebellion. Therefore, he didn't pay much attention to these barbarians. As a result, these cities were captured without much effort. At this time, that military advisor spoke again. The Aboriginals' lives were in the hands of others. No matter who became the emperor, if the barbarians weren't exchanged for salt, the barbarians could only rebel again. This would never end. Furthermore, this was a great opportunity. The Han nation's upper echelons were corrupt, their army was weak, and there was chaos in the country. It was better to directly occupy the palace and behead the main culprit. This way they could establish a nation and the descendants of the barbarians could live and work in peace and contentment. At that time, under this person's plan, the barbarians didn't suffer heavy losses regardless of whether it was annihilating the 40,000 soldiers or capturing the cities. The Aboriginals trusted him and were persuaded. The Aboriginals, who had never thought of this before, were tempted after hearing this idea. These days, they were envious of the prosperity they saw in the various cities. This person was also a strategist. Their current military strength was somewhat insufficient and they had to contact the Aboriginals in the depths of the mountain range. At the same time, if they attacked now, the Han nation's attention would be focused on them. It was better to occupy these cities first and pretend that they wouldn't attack anymore. Then they could contact the merchants from the Yun nation and the Chin nation to exchange the resources in these cities for salt. This way, the Han nation's emperor would definitely let down his guard and eliminate the rebellion in the country first. After hearing this, Yapeng felt that this was a good idea. Although the barbarians in the depths of the 60,000 mountains had other ways to obtain salt and wouldn't be so easily persuaded, he still sent a few people to persuade them. The reality was just as he said. The Hao Nation's emperor didn't expect the aboriginals to dare to plot against him and focused all his energy on suppressing the rebellion. Another 8 months passed. During this half a year, the aboriginals stayed in these cities and didn't attack again. This made the Hao Nation's emperor feel relieved. The war in the country was getting more and more intense. He mobilized all the available troops to suppress the rebellion. Only a small portion of the troops guarded the north and east. At this moment, a large number of aboriginal soldiers walked out from the depths of the mountains and met up with Yapeng and the others. Then they set off for the imperial city. These aboriginal soldiers from the depths of the mountain range were more powerful because of the harsh living environment and the presence of all kinds of ferocious beasts. During this period of time, they attacked the cities and waded through the rivers. Among them, the 2 most difficult passes were opened by people in the middle of the night. It turned out that the military counselor had already arranged people inside without anyone knowing. After 10 days, the barbarian army fought their way to the imperial city and finally executed the Hao Nation's emperor in public. Initially, Yapeng and the aboriginals only wanted revenge and to plunder daily necessities. In the end, under the incitement of the military advisor, the Hao Nation was destroyed. When the Hao Nation's emperor saw the military advisor, he was extremely shocked. When he found out that the military advisor was the aboriginals' military advisor, he became even crazier and shouted out everything. At this moment, everyone realized that the person who provoked the Hao Nation's emperor to demand 100 women from the aboriginals and poison the stone salt was this military advisor. The military advisor didn't stop or defend himself and allowed the Hao Nation's emperor to reveal everything. After the Hao Nation's emperor finished speaking, he revealed another piece of shocking news. He was the one who arranged a few of the rebellions in the Hao Nation. He was also in contact with the other rebel armies. His goal was to destroy the Hao Nation. He had planned all of this for a total of 15 years. In addition to the 2 years of military campaigns, he had planned for a total of 17 years. At this moment, it could be said that everyone was fooled by him, including the Hao Nation's emperor, the aboriginals, and even the rebel armies. Chapter 57. Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat as he listened to the story. He recalled how heroic the military advisor was back then. He single-handedly destroyed an entire nation and toyed with the troops of several parties. Such a person was indeed admirable. What happened next? Rinpoche asked. He really wanted to know what happened to the military advisor. Such a powerful person would definitely have arranged a way out for himself, right? Also, why did the military advisor do all these things? Later on, after the military advisor told everyone everything, he smiled and committed suicide by consuming poison in the face of everyone's anger. After his death, Yapeng found a few pieces of paper in his room. The paper included the arrangements for what happened after that and the reason why he did all these things. Rinpoche did not expect such an ending. That person actually committed suicide by consuming poison in the end. However, some people said that they saw him somewhere else. He faked his death that day. Who knows? Tai Dao shrugged his shoulders. Rinpoche was more convinced of this ending. How could a person with such a plan die just like that? Perhaps he really faked his death to escape and wandered the world incognito. Caretaker Rin, do you know why Her Majesty's surname is Qi? Tenghulu laughed. Rinpoche knew that Tenghulu must have a reason for asking this question. Combining it with the previous story, he suddenly had an idea. Could it be that person's surname is Qi? Yes. After the death of his family, the late emperor had no more worries. He did not expect to become the emperor one day. After the death of the military advisor, he changed his surname to Qi. Some people said that the late emperor changed his surname after reading the contents of the paper. What was written on the paper? Rinpoche asked curiously. He had always wanted to know why that person would do such a thing and even lose his life in the end. It could not be because he was a noble, pure, moral person, a person who was free from vulgar interests, and a person who was beneficial to the people. His entire life's plan was for the rise of the aboriginals and the establishment of Dayo, right? I don't know. Perhaps only Her Majesty knows now. Tenghulu shook his head and said, some people say that he is a mixed blood of the Hao Nation and my people. How do you know so much? Rinpoche asked curiously. Logically, these things should not be spread to everyone, right? My ancestor was in the army that year and even attacked the palace, Tenghulu said. He told my grandfather, and my grandfather told me. Me too. Tai Dao nodded. What happened to the Hao Nation and the rebel soldiers? Rinpoche asked again. Some of them have fled to the Yun Nation, the Qin Nation and Great Xia, while the rest are living in the south, Tenghulu said. They're in the south? Does it also belong to Dayo? Ren Baqin asked curiously. In any case, everyone knew that he was an outsider and knew nothing about Dayo. There was no need for him to hide anything. If they were curious, they could just ask directly. The plains in the south near the 60,000 mountains are all Dayo aboriginals, and their numbers are about the same as the aboriginals of Dayo. Of course, they're from Dayo, but they're not content with their lot. At first, Teng Hulu was a little uncertain. Later on, when he mentioned that those people were restless, his eyes were filled with killing intent. Tai Dao, who was standing at the side, sneered. This was the first time Ren Baqin saw such expressions on their faces. It seemed like there was a huge conflict between the aboriginals and the Hao Nation in Dayo. However, thinking about it, no matter how licentious and tyrannical the Hao Nation's emperor was, he was still a civilized nation. No matter what, he would not be willing to let the entire nation be destroyed by the barbarians in the mountains. In the history of China, weren't there many people with lofty ideals who fought against the Qing and restored the Ming? From the bottom of his heart, Ren Baqin more or less sympathized with those people from the Hao Nation. However, it seemed like he was on the same side as the aboriginals and had even integrated into them. Ren Baqin could only sympathize with them in his heart. This was also because they had the same history. He himself did not have any sense of identity with the Hao Nation. Both sides were very unfamiliar to him, but he was closer to the aboriginals. Ren Baqin calculated in his heart. There were 30 to 40 million people in Dayo, but he did not know if that included the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. After asking, he confirmed that it indeed included the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. In this case, there were only 10 to 20 million aboriginals, and most of them were in the mountains. However, no one knew exactly how many aboriginals there were in the 60,000 mountains. The 60,000 mountains were really too big. The deeper one went, the steeper it became. There were also more ferocious beasts, and they were all very powerful. Until now, no one had passed through the 60,000 mountains to see what the other side was like. Currently, the aboriginals only included the aboriginal strongholds deep in the mountains from which the troops were deployed. Ren Baqin asked a few more questions, and both of them answered. Finally, Ren Baqin had a certain understanding of the situation in Dayo. The original Hao Nation soldiers and the rebel army were defeated 3 times in the war with the aboriginals, and the rebel army was almost completely wiped out. If it weren't for the fact that the aboriginals also suffered heavy losses, the restlessness of the other nations, and Great Xia directly dispatched troops to occupy a few border cities, the aboriginals would probably have wiped them all out. Under such circumstances, both sides took a step back. The rebel army and the majority of the Hao Nation soldiers in the south were similar to an autonomous system. This was arranged according to the last contents of the paper left by the military advisor. They could have a small number of troops, and the Hao Nation soldiers would govern the Hao Nation internally. However, the largest area they could control was the area of a city. A small number of troops could be maintained in the city, but the number of troops and equipment were considerably limited. In addition, the aboriginals were superior to them in other aspects and weren't strict. On the whole, Dayo still maintained the simplicity of the aboriginals and wasn't harsh on the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. In fact, other than the monarch of the Hao Nation, they didn't have any resentment towards the ordinary people. As such, the overall situation was that the aboriginals would govern themselves, don't cause trouble, and don't play any tricks. The aboriginals couldn't be bothered to deal with them. If anything happened, the aboriginals would immediately arrive. Even so, there were still people who didn't give up and would occasionally play tricks. In addition to the blood feud from the previous few wars, the conflict had become more and more intense over the years. Of course, the most important point was that there weren't any remnant citizens of the Hao Nation in the imperial court of Dayo. The highest position a remnant citizen of the Hao Nation could achieve was to become the lord of a city and guard that small piece of land. The remnant citizens of the Hao Nation rarely lived in other places. Both parties didn't integrate at all, and it seemed like the aboriginals didn't have any intention of integrating the other party into their own. This was also one of the reasons why they weren't content with their lot. After all, there would always be people with ambitions and aspirations. Being the lord of a city wasn't enough to satisfy them. After all, the lord of a city was still in that small piece of land, and there would always be people who wanted a bigger sky. However, these weren't things that Ren Baqin needed to worry about. From these past events, Ren Baqin could roughly guess why the empress had such a big reaction after hearing about the investiture of the gods. There were many aspects that were very similar to what the aboriginals had experienced. As the 3 of them sat and chatted, 3 burly men dressed as imperial guards walked over from a distance. The one in front was Sherhu. When Rinpoche saw them, he stood up and was about to welcome them when he heard Shirhu say, "Rinpoche received the imperial edict." Rinpoche was dumbfounded when he heard this. He completely didn't know what to do. Should he kneel on one knee or both knees, or receive the edict while standing? He had no experience at all. Caretaker Rin, kneel on one knee and receive the edict. Shirhu knew Rinpoche's situation and reminded him in a soft voice. Rinpoche quickly did as he was told. Shirhu then unrolled a scroll that was black on the sides and white in the middle. The imperial edict of the Dayo Emperor declares that Rinpoche is a storyteller for Qingxin Palace Hall. Rinpoche was at a loss after hearing this. What was going on with storytelling in Qingxin Palace Hall? Could it be that there was an official who was responsible for telling stories to the emperor? Caretaker Rin, why aren't you receiving the imperial edict? Shirhu whispered. Your subject received the imperial edict. Rinpoche quickly raised both of his hands, just like how it was shown on television. After receiving the scroll, Rinpoche's mind was still in a daze. He didn't know what exactly was going on. He had definitely been promoted. Previously he was still a nobody. Now he could receive the imperial edict. This was definitely a promotion. Then what? What was he going to do? Where was he going to stay? Sir Rin, congratulations. Shirhu cupped his fists and said, Brother Shir, please don't call me sir. Just call me Brother Rin. Rinpoche pulled Shirhu to one side and asked, Brother Shir, what kind of official position is this? Shirhu shook his head with a strange expression and replied, I don't know. Chapter 58. It's written on the edict. Shirhu pointed at the edict. Rinpoche opened the edict. There were dozens of words on it, but he couldn't recognize any of them. He remembered that Shirhu didn't say more than 20 words when he read the edict. There were at least 40 to 50 words on the edict. What does it say? Before Rinpoche came here, he never thought he would be illiterate. His English had passed level 4 and he could even understand a few words of Japanese, yamit. I don't know. Shirhu looked serious and reliable. However, Rinpoche was dumbfounded after hearing his words. You don't know? Rinpoche almost shouted. I can't read. Shirhu said matter-of-factly. Rinpoche opened his mouth wide and his tonsils almost popped out. Although he didn't know what his official position was, Caretaker Go of the Imperial Kitchen respected him a lot since he often came out to summon Rinpoche to the palace hall. With this kind of status, it would be considered low to call him a palace guard. Furthermore, the two soldiers just now obviously treated him as their leader. How could such a person be illiterate? Then what you said just now, it was dictated by Her Majesty, Shirhu said solemnly. Brother Shir, what do you know? Rinpoche's face twitched for a long time. From what Her Majesty said just now, Brother Rin, your official position is from Great Xia. This is the first time in Dayo that it's a reward. It's considered a secondary class, rank 8, and you receive a salary from the palace. Shirhu finally knew something. He felt a little embarrassed after saying that he didn't know anything. Then what do I have to do? Where do I stay? Rinpoche was still at a loss. His current residence was in the Beast Park. If he couldn't stay in the Beast Park in the future, where would he stay? Furthermore, without Teng Hulu and Tai Dao, even with the electric baton, he didn't feel very safe. Her Majesty did say that because you have other responsibilities, you will stay in the Beast Park and wait at Qingxin Palace Hall every afternoon. Where is Qingxin Palace Hall? Rinpoche asked. It's the place where the palace books are kept. Here is a token. Hand it to the palace guards at noon and someone will bring you there. Shirhu took out a token from his waist. Don't lose it. You'll need this token to enter and leave the palace. Rinpoche stretched out his hand to catch it. It wasn't a big plate, but it was very heavy and cold to the touch. He didn't know what kind of metal it was made of, but its surface was suffused with a silver glow. In any case, the fact that they were still staying in the Beast Park made Rinpoche feel more at ease. He was more familiar with this place and felt more secure here. It was just that he didn't have much time to go out in the future. Also, he would disappear once every 3 days. Even though the Empress knew about it and said that she wouldn't pursue the matter, he still felt that it was somewhat dangerous. It seemed like he still had to show his worth, lest the Empress suddenly couldn't find him and beheaded him in a bad mood. Thank you, Brother Shir. Please wait for me for a while. Rinpoche cupped his hands in obeisance and thanked Shirmu. Then he ran into the house and grabbed a handful of silver. Back then he had used a saw blade to cut off the large ingots of silver, and now he only had this kind of broken silver. According to what was said on TV at this time, It was necessary to bribe the person who came to announce the decree with money. From the perspective of human relations, it would not be a loss to offer him a handful of silver. Brother Rin is a quick-witted person. I won't stand on ceremony, I will look for you for a drink another day. Shihu laughed heartily and patted Rinpoche's shoulder. Then he stuffed the handful of silver to the 2 imperial guards behind him and said, "This is from Brother Ren. Take it back and drink with you." "Thank you, Sir Ren." The 2 imperial guards received the silver and laughed. They looked at Rinpoche with a gaze full of goodwill. It seemed like no matter where, money could do a lot of things. Of course, Shihu's reputation was also involved in this. "I shall not stay any longer, I still have to report back." Shihu cupped his hands in obeisance to Rinpoche, turned around and left with the 2 imperial guards. After Shihu left, Teng Hulu and Tai Dao went forward to congratulate Rinpoche. "Congratulations, Caretaker Ren. From now on you will have to call you Sir Ren." Rinpoche touched the token. Until now he still felt that it was a little unreal. He had risen from a mediocre official to a secondary class, rank 8 official just like that? His rank was even higher than Caretaker Shi's. However, Rinpoche obviously had an official position and was receiving a salary. His authority was much lower than Caretaker Shi's. In any case, he was still an official. Previously, he had told stories for so many days and did not mention that he would be rewarded. Yet he was rewarded today. He did not know if it was because of the air cooler or his bootlicking skills. It was more likely that there were various reasons. Rinpoche returned to his room and took out 2 ingots of silver and threw them to the 2. "Happy to see this." The 2 of them grabbed the silver and laughed. "Sir Ren's official robe has not been delivered yet. You still have to go to the palace in the afternoon. I reckon it will be delivered before noon," Teng Hulu said. Rinpoche nodded. He had forgotten to ask about this matter just now. He was still inexperienced. He then asked curiously, "What is the official position of that Shihu who announced the imperial edict?" "He is a palace guard, but it seems like he will be promoted soon," Teng Hulu said. He then added, "The palace guards are secondary class, rank 5. They are the most elite warriors who are good at fighting. However, they only have ranks and no official positions. They are different from people like Sir Ren." Not long after, Caretaker Shi heard the news and rushed over. He cupped his fists and greeted Rinpoche. "Greetings, Sir Ren." "Caretaker Shi, don't give me the cold shoulder," Rinpoche hurriedly said. "Just call me Brother Ren." "That won't do. Now that your official position is higher than mine, I still have to address you as I should." Caretaker Shi laughed heartily. "Sir Ren is having a joyous occasion today. Later, get the kitchen to prepare a few tables so that everyone can bask in the joyous atmosphere." Tai Dao and Teng Hulu immediately went to inform Caretaker Shi. "Alright, there is no one else. Brother Shi, just call me Brother Ren. This official position is a reward." "It is much worse than yours," Rinpoche said. "In that case, I will still call you Brother Ren in the future." Shihu patted Rinpoche's shoulder. He almost slapped Rinpoche into the ground. Rinpoche's entire body immediately fell askew. Rinpoche reckoned that his shoulder would swell up after this slap. "Oh yes, Caretaker Shi, I am afraid I can no longer take up my position in the Beast Park. In the future, I will hand over the ice cellar to Caretaker Shi. As for those people, I will make arrangements for the ice cellar. Those 3 people in charge of the ice cellar will stay there. Out of the other 7, 5 will follow you. After all, there are still a few acres of land. I will arrange for the other 2 to do other things," Caretaker Shi immediately said. "In that case, many thanks. Leave Teng Hulu and Tai Dao with me," Rinpoche smiled. He was already familiar with Teng Hulu and Tai Dao. Rinpoche still had some messy jobs that he had to hand over to the 2 of them to do. For example, skin tanning. He was even preparing to make a sofa. Rinpoche touched the so-called imperial edict in his hand and asked tentatively without any expectations, "Caretaker Shi, can you read?" Chapter 59. Rinpoche had to admit that the basic quality of education in Dayo was indeed worrying. In any case, it had already been 70 years since the founding of Dayo. Not many people were literate. Take a look at China. Before the founding of the People's Republic, the literacy rate was not high. 70 years later, although not everyone was literate, it was almost the same. In any case, Caretaker Shi was the chief caretaker of the Beast Park. He was a rank 9 martial artist and had dozens of subordinates. Including his family members, there were more than 100 of them. Can't even read? And that Shi who just now was a secondary class 5 imperial bodyguard who was illiterate. Rinpoche was really doubtful about how they were going to convey documents and orders. They couldn't possibly just rely on oral instructions, right? When it was almost noon, 2 people from the palace came to deliver Rinpoche's official robes. It was a set of clothes that was mainly black with a red collar and cuffs. There was even a bird pattern on it. The material was much softer than what Rinpoche was wearing now. Furthermore, it felt smooth and felt like silk. The style was not that of ancient Chinese robes with big sleeves. Although the clothes were longer, reaching the knees, the sleeves were only slightly wider than ordinary clothes. After Rinpoche changed into it, he couldn't see whether it looked good or not. However, the breathability and comfort were much better than before. The only thing that made him feel a little uncomfortable was that he was a little fat. The people of Dayo were all tall and sturdy. Their arms were strong enough to run a horse. Compared to them, Rinpoche's physique was more than an order of magnitude lower. The clothes he wore made him look a little fat. Caretaker Sher was stunned when he saw Rinpoche come out after changing his clothes. Soon after, he burst out laughing. Rinpoche got goosebumps from his laughter. He didn't think he was wearing the wrong clothes, right? Look for me tonight, I'll get someone to help you change it. Caretaker Sher laughed heartily. Rinpoche gestured at his baggy official robe and roughly knew why Caretaker Sher laughed. If he were to wear such big clothes, he would probably look like a monkey wearing a robe. However, he had to go to Qingxin Palace Hall at noon. It seemed like he could only change it after he returned. They had lunch as a form of celebration for Rinpoche. Although that was the case, the food was no different from usual. The only difference was that there were more spices, which made the food more fragrant. The banquet was lively. Even though Rinpoche hadn't stayed here for a long time, he was beginning to integrate into the culture. Seeing the sincere congratulatory smiles on everyone's faces, he felt a surge of warmth in his heart. These people were really too cute. Rinpoche, who was still sighing just a second ago, immediately grabbed the stool to cover his chest and shouted, "Who's using their dirty claws to slap me again?" His face was filled with the words, "If you dare slap me with your oily claws again, I'll smash your face with a stool." After the meal, Rinpoche cupped his hands at everyone and entered the palace with a body full of claw marks. There was nothing he could do about it. He only had one set of official robes and he didn't even have a change of clothes. Time was up. Rinpoche clenched his teeth and left. Fortunately, the greasy claw print on the black robe was a little more conspicuous under the sunlight. If it was inside the hall, one would not be able to see it without looking carefully. He passed the token to the palace gate guards for inspection. The 2 of them asked him to wait for a while. One of them took the token and went in for 2 or 3 minutes before coming out empty-handed. Then the 2 of them and Rinpoche stared at each other as they waited. The 2 of them looked at Rinpoche, who was wearing an oversized official robe and had a body full of shiny, greasy claw marks. Their faces twitched. If they didn't know that they were the face of the palace and needed to maintain their manners, they would probably be lying there laughing. Anyway, Rinpoche couldn't see what he looked like, so he let them be. This robe was still quite comfortable. After waiting for a while, a female official in her 30s or 40s hurried out. She looked at Rinpoche and almost spurted out her saliva. "Follow me." That female official threw the token back to Rinpoche and said while holding back her laughter. Just as Rinpoche entered the door, he heard 2 people laughing behind him. "Shouldn't you at least wait for me to walk further away before laughing? Otherwise, why did you endure for so long just now? All I have to do is turn my back on him, right?" Just now, he directly stood with his back facing them, and they wouldn't have to endure for so long. "How should I address you, sir?" Rinpoche followed behind and asked cautiously. He didn't know the identity of the person in front of him, but he was an official bestowed by the Empress. He was afraid that he would have to enter the palace frequently in the future. It was better to maintain a good relationship no matter what. "Don't call me sir, call me Keeper Sher. Keeper is my position." Keeper Sher turned around and glanced at Rinpoche. "I understand." Rinpoche nodded his head. It seemed like Keeper Sher was really a big surname. Not knowing the other party's temperament, Rinpoche didn't dare to say much. The 2 of them walked in silence for a while and arrived in front of a palace. Keeper Sher stopped, turned around and said, "This is the place. You can enter with the token." "Thank you." Rinpoche cupped his hands and walked into the palace hall. This palace hall was about 2 stories high. It looked rather tall and occupied a large area. After pushing open the door and entering the palace hall, Rinpoche saw a 16 or 17-year-old girl sitting behind a table. She was wearing the same clothes as the female official just now, and she was holding a paper book. She was reading very seriously. If it wasn't for the fact that she was drooling, Rinpoche felt that she was a talent to be able to sit there with that book in her hand and sleep so soundly. She didn't even know that he had pushed open the door and entered. What made Rinpoche even more astonished was that she could actually become a female official at such a young age. Rinpoche saw that she was sleeping soundly and didn't disturb her. After taking a closer look, this female official was quite good-looking. Compared to the common Dayo women, she gave off a warm and fragrant vibe. He wasn't sure if it was because she didn't spend much time under the sun, but her skin was fairer. Furthermore, she didn't have that heroic and wild aura between her brows. After which, Rinpoche sized up the palace hall again. He saw that there were rows of rooms in the palace hall. The place where he was standing now was a passageway. However, the passageway was wider and was at least 3 meters wide. The rooms on both sides were made of hollow wood. He could see that there were many scrolls and books on the shelves inside. Some were made of animal skin and some were made of paper. Rinpoche reckoned that they were all books. In that case, this should be the book vault. After sizing up the place, Rinpoche had nothing to do. He leaned against the wall and stared blankly. After an unknown period of time, the book in the lady's hand fell to the ground with a thud. The lady woke up with a start. She hurriedly wiped her drool and bent over to pick up the book. She heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she was the only one who saw it. Then she saw a man looking at her with a kind smile. Ah! The girl's eyes suddenly widened like a frightened cat. Rinpoche hurriedly put down the token in his hand and showed it to her. "I'm new here today." "I remember now." The lady suddenly realized and then hammered her own head. "I forgot about this. You are the new storyteller of Qingshin Palace Hall, right?" The lady said. Following which, she raised her head and said, "Why didn't you greet me when you came in?" It seemed like she was angry that someone saw her drooling while she was sleeping. "Seeing that you were sleeping soundly, I didn't have the nerve to greet you." Rinpoche laughed. The lady fiercely glared at him. Chapter 60. Seeing that the other party didn't seem to want to talk to him, Rinpoche asked, "May I know how to address you?" The female official thought for a while and seemed to feel that she might have to see this man in front of her every day for a period of time, so she said, "My name is Lin Xiaola. Call me Librarian Li Lin." Ancient books? This was equivalent to a librarian, right? As Rinpoche thought about it, he asked the question that he was concerned about. "Greetings, Librarian Lin. May I know what I'm here for?" "I don't know. Just find a place to stay and don't disturb me. Wait for His Majesty to summon you into the palace hall," Lin Xiaola said casually. After hearing this, Rinpoche went to one side and stared blankly. After standing for a while, he got tired and sat on the ground. The ground inside seemed to be quite clean. Someone cleaned it every day, so there was not a speck of dust. Lin Xiaola ignored him and sat there reading. Not long after, Rinpoche noticed that her head was nodding bit by bit, and it looked like it was about to hit the table. Rinpoche was delighted to see her like this. This was the legendary falling asleep as soon as she touched the book. The person in charge of the library was actually someone who slept with books every day. It was somewhat different from his impression. Boom. Rinpoche spat out his drink when he saw that she was leaning against the table with her face. Librarian Lin was too much fun. He could watch her sleep for an entire afternoon. Ah. Lin Xiaola covered her nose and tears welled up in her eyes. When he realized that Rinpoche was staring at him, he scratched his head in frustration. "Why can't I control my sleepiness?" Someone saw him again. Her fine black hair instantly turned into a bird's nest, just like Mei Chao who had gone mad. "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen people doze off before?" Lin Xiaola was going crazy. Rinpoche held back his laughter, turned his head away, and silently added that there weren't many people who would use their faces to smash the table, especially when their faces were covered in saliva. After 3 to 4 minutes, Rinpoche reckoned that the other party had cleaned up. He turned his head and saw her pouting in a daze. When she realized that Rinpoche was looking at her, she immediately turned her head to the other side. The temperament of a little girl, Rinpoche thought to himself. Rinpoche was even more curious about how she managed to get her hands on the ancient books and records here. "Librarian Lin, can you read?" Rinpoche asked. "Of course." Lin Xiaola raised her head like a proud hen. "Can you teach me how to read?" Rinpoche laughed. He didn't know how long he would have to travel between these two worlds. He couldn't possibly be illiterate forever, right? There were so many books here. After he learned the words here, he could look for some books to read. Maybe there would be something he was interested in. "You can't read?" Lin Xiaola widened her eyes in astonishment. The storyteller of Qingxin Palace Hall was actually illiterate? This was simply the biggest joke. Rinpoche spread his hands and said, "I really can't read. Can you teach me?" "No." Lin Xiaola turned her head away again. Rinpoche chuckled. He reckoned that Lin Xiaola, who had the temperament of a little girl, was inexplicably resentful. Let's talk about it when she forgets about it. Anyway, this matter was not urgent. After staying there for about an hour, two maids came in with cleaning tools. They cupped their fists and greeted Lin Xiaola, "Librarian Lin." It seemed like the common etiquette in Dayo was to cup one's fist and salute. Regardless of gender, they would only go down on one knee when they saw the emperor. Lin Xiaola kept a straight face and nodded at the two maids. The two of them looked at Rinpoche curiously and went in to clean up. Just as the two of them entered, an imperial guard came to the door and asked, "Is the storyteller of Qingxin Palace Hall here?" "Yes, I am." Rinpoche immediately jumped up from the ground, patted the non-existent dust off his butt and walked forward. "Her Majesty is looking for you," the imperial guard said and let him out. Rinpoche initially thought that he would return to the palace hall, but after making a few detours, he realized that the route was not right. The sound of an unknown musical instrument could be heard from afar. The sound was desolate and distant, and it gave people the feeling that it was full of simplicity and nature, just like the name of the aboriginals. Following the sound of this musical instrument, they finally arrived at a garden. The garden was filled with exotic flowers and plants that competed with each other in beauty. There were also some trees that weren't very tall. It wasn't as exquisite as the gardens in China. The flowers and plants here were a little messy, but it was full of vitality. A river that wasn't considered deep flowed through the garden, and there was a stone bridge over it. Not far from the stone bridge, the empress, who was dressed in red, was sitting in a pavilion. Beside her, there was a woman playing an unknown musical instrument. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were standing not far away. No matter where the empress was, she would always have these two people by her side. This made Rinpoche realize that he could offend anyone in the palace except for the empress and these two people. These two people were the so-called close officials. There were no eunuchs in Dayo's palace, only female officials, maids and imperial guards. These two people were definitely the most trusted aides of the empress. "Greetings, Your Majesty," Rinpoche said as he knelt on one knee near the empress. "You are a fast learner." The empress shifted her gaze to Rinpoche, following which she was slightly stunned. Her eyebrows were raised at first, then slowly lowered. "How did you get yourself into such a sorry state?" The empress's cold voice sounded. "I was careless in the afternoon." "Please forgive me, Your Majesty," Rinpoche quickly replied. "Even though Dayo doesn't place as much emphasis on style as Great Xia, but since you are now an official, you have to be more careful. If I see you in such a state again, you will definitely suffer." It was rare for the empress to say a few more words, but it made Rinpoche break out in a cold sweat. "Yes, I know my mistake," Rinpoche quickly replied. In his heart he was cursing those fellows in the beast park. If it wasn't for them, he wouldn't have ended up in such a state. The empress frowned slightly. "Where did you learn to say this from?" Rinpoche laughed dryly. He couldn't possibly say that he learned it from television, so he could only say, "It's like this in China." "Have you been an official in China before?" the empress asked faintly. Rinpoche had never been a class monitor since he was young, let alone an official. In his heart he was wondering if he should brag or something. In any case, there was no way to verify it. However, when he raised his head and saw the empress's cold eyes, he immediately became terrified. He swallowed the words that were at the tip of his tongue and shook his head. "I have never been an official," he muttered in his heart. Her eyes were really too sharp. It was as if she could directly see through his heart. He didn't dare to lie even though he was already at the tip of his tongue. "Continue with your story," the empress leaned back slightly and said. Rinpoche cleared his throat. Narrating the investiture of the gods with this bleak music gave him a special feeling. When he reached the part where the emperor wanted the minister to die, he didn't dare to not die. The empress asked, "Is China like this?" Rinpoche thought for a while and carefully replied, "There's another saying in China. Water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it." The empress repeated this saying, pondered for a while and nodded. "That makes some sense. The emperor of a country should take care of his own people. If his people can't even eat, what's the use of being the emperor? Naturally, his people will rebel." He had to admit that the empress was indeed very intelligent. Even though she had never heard of such words before, she could immediately understand the meaning behind it. Chapter 61. Thanks to Piss All Over 01, Tale of Dreams, Brother Hay of the Tujia family, and to the other readers who voted to comment in the book review and comment section. In fact, this book was prepared to be updated after it was published, but now that there are 3 branch chiefs, I have to express my gratitude. Thank you, everyone. The Empress waved her hand, stood up, and gazed into the distance in the pavilion. After a while she said, "However, there are some people who will always have different ideas no matter how you treat them. What do you think we should do with such people?" Rinpoche thought to himself that the Empress wasn't talking about him, right? He didn't have any messy ideas. It sounded more like she was talking about the remnant citizens of the Hao nation. But what did the Empress mean by saying this? Was she testing him? The person in front of him could pinch him to death with one hand. This wasn't an adjective. Rinpoche had no choice but to be careful. He didn't want to be meritorious, but he wanted to avoid making mistakes. After sorting out his words, Rinpoche cautiously said, "I feel that we should assimilate them and let them have a sense of identity with their country. This way, some people may not be able to change and may have other ideas, especially those who are older. However, the new generation can identify with the country from a young age. After they grow up, the situation will change." After Rinpoche finished speaking, the Empress turned to face him without saying anything. He didn't know what she was thinking. Apart from the sound of the musical instrument, there was nothing else. Just when Rinpoche was wondering if what he said didn't suit her, the Empress turned around and said coldly, "If I say so, all of them will be beheaded." Although the Empress didn't do anything else, her expression and words still made Rinpoche feel cold and subconsciously shrunk his neck. The Empress sat back in her original position and said, "If it wasn't for the late Emperor, I would have beheaded them. However, what you said is quite interesting. Tell me in detail." Rinpoche was now sure that the Empress was talking about the remnant citizens of the Hao nation. Although he didn't know why the Empress asked him, he still racked his brains and sorted out the things in his mind and listed them in 1, 2, 3, 4. To put it bluntly, it was the patriotism education. Regular lectures on patriotism, such as remembering the bitterness and sweetness of life, the 8 honors and 8 disgraces, would be lectured to them and required to memorize them. If there were conditions, it would be best to arrange for people to teach them in their private schools. They had to learn. At the same time, the culture and traditions of the Aboriginals were passed on to them, and the cultures of both sides merged. In the end, both sides lived together. Now, they were confined to a small circle and did not know much about the Aboriginals. Every day they came into contact with the remnants of the Hao nation. Furthermore, the Aboriginals had destroyed the nation. In the long run, they would naturally be surrounded by resentment. If both parties were to live together, the other party would see that there was nothing wrong with the Aboriginals other than their strength. Furthermore, the Aboriginals were simple and honest. Naturally, they would be less prejudiced against them. After all, most of the people were simple and honest no matter where they were. In reality, most of them were ambitious people. They were unwilling to accept the current situation, but they could not see the path to advancement. Naturally, they would have all kinds of ideas. If a certain number of official positions were opened up and they were allowed to enter the imperial court, in order to protect their own positions, they would suppress those who were disloyal. Step by step, this was patriotism education, division, and suppression. It was basically a method that had been used on Earth over and over again. The Empress quietly listened to what Rinpoche had to say. After he finished speaking, she remained silent for a long time before saying, "Continue with your story." Rinpoche could not read minds and naturally did not know what she was thinking. However, he guessed that she was probably considering the feasibility of this plan. Rinpoche felt that if she really wanted to do it, this plan was quite feasible. After all, it had already been proven on Earth. As long as it was adjusted according to the situation in Dayo, it would be fine. If this method did not work, Rinpoche had a more ruthless method. However, he was afraid that he would train a bunch of pyramid schemers. He now felt that he was like the henchman of the villain in a movie, helping to come up with all kinds of bad ideas. This was especially true for the remnants of the Hao nation. However, it was not without benefits for them. At the very least, they would be less scheming in private. This was to prevent the Empress in front of them from saying, "Behead," when she was in a bad mood. At that time there would really be heads rolling. When Rinpoche continued to talk about how the demon fox transformed into Daji and entered the palace, the Empress was absent-minded. However, Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were engrossed in listening. When he talked about how Yun Zhongzi went down the mountain, the Empress then focused on the story. This kind of fairy tale was quite attractive to her. When he said, "If the Emperor treats his subjects like brothers, then the subjects will treat the Emperor like confidants." If the emperor treats his subjects like dirt, then the subjects will treat the emperor like bandits. The empress was slightly enlightened. These words of yours from China do make some sense. The empress nodded. The principles of the world are interconnected. It is the same everywhere, Rinpoche said. That is not necessarily true. The empress suddenly sneered. Rinpoche did not know if he had said something wrong. When Rinpoche talked about Fei Zhong's scheme to depose Empress Jiang, someone came to inform the empress that it was time for dinner. That's all for today. Go back and tidy up. Don't do this again tomorrow. The empress stood up and said, Yes. Rinpoche made up his mind to find someone to change his clothes and wash them quickly. Your Majesty. Rinpoche saw that the empress was about to leave and quickly called out. Is there anything else? The empress turned sideways and looked at him. I would like to ask, what is my official position? Rinpoche was a little embarrassed. Just do what you are doing now, the empress said. She then left with Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan. The musician also started to pack his instruments. After the empress left, Rinpoche smiled bitterly. It seemed like he was really a storyteller. However, this was also good. He still did not understand many aspects of Dayo. If he was asked to do something else, he would not be able to do it. This was not Earth. If he made any mistakes, he would at most be scolded or fined. Rinpoche followed the original route according to his memory and only found the way out of the palace when he was about to reach Qingshin Palace Hall. When he returned, he took off his clothes and found someone to change them. He lay on the bed and immediately felt a little tired. His mind was mostly thinking about the empress's reaction at that time and guessing what she was thinking. Those remnant citizens of the Hao nation seemed to be very annoyed by the empress. If not for the previous emperor's order, she would have killed them all. He did not know if his words could change the other party's mind and make her change her mind. After thinking about it, he felt that he had nothing better to do. He did not know what to do now. He had just become a storyteller in Qingshin Palace Hall and was actually worried about the life and death of 20 million people. These things should be left to the empress and those people in the imperial court to consider. He should first learn the words here and read more books when he had nothing to do. He should understand the situation of this world first. Maslow's hierarchy of needs categorized human needs from low to high as physiological needs, safety needs, social needs, respect needs, and self-actualization needs. Chapter 62. The next morning, Rinpoche tried on the clothes that he had just washed and dried. It was not bad. Even though there was no mirror, he could feel that it fit his body. The one helping to change the clothes was the wife of an odd job worker. Her skills were quite good. After trying on the clothes, Rinpoche changed them so that those heartless fellows wouldn't leave claw marks all over his body. He didn't know when they would send him a change of official robes. Since he had nothing to do, he chatted with Teng Hulu and Tai Dao and listened to them talk about the military counselor. Rinpoche didn't chase after celebrities since kindergarten because it was too childish. Now he worshipped the military counselor like a fan. He would even listen to stories about the military counselor with great interest. There were many intelligent people in history and many of them were famous. However, there weren't many like him. It was a pity that the two of them didn't know his name. They only knew that his surname was Qi. It seemed that very few people mentioned his name at that time. As a result, not many people knew his name now. It was said that there was a portrait of him in the palace. It was drawn by an aboriginal who was very artistic. Rinpoche really wanted to see what it looked like when he had the chance. Thinking of the scrolls and books in Qingshin Palace Hall, Rinpoche felt that it was very likely there. After lunch, Rinpoche changed his clothes and strolled into the palace. He showed the token in front of the door and allowed him to enter. Rinpoche entered the palace and looked at the token in his hand. It seemed that the token was really useful. He could actually enter and exit the palace at will? A person of unknown origin like him could actually give this thing to him. However, thinking of the Empress's fighting strength, Rinpoche felt that she wouldn't put him in her eyes. Even if he stuffed a knife into his hand, he wouldn't be able to defend himself. Along the way to Qingshin Palace Hall, Rinpoche saw Lin Xiaola sitting on the stone steps in front of the door. She was supporting her chin with her hand and her eyes were squinted. Rinpoche couldn't figure out whether she was sleeping or not. Librarian Lin. Rinpoche walked over to her and greeted her. Seeing that she didn't respond, he shook his head and didn't disturb her anymore. He let her be immersed in her dream. When he entered Qingshin Palace Hall, he saw another book on the table. This time it was a book made of animal hide. He didn't know how long it had been there, but it looked rather old. Rinpoche picked it up and flipped in the middle were a few pictures. There were only a few dozen words on various page, and each word was like a drawing. Manuals of martial arts. However, there were a few characters that were similar to Chinese characters, such as San, became excited, and Wang. Even if he just didn't know if they had the same the Empress, it would still be good if he could strengthen his body. He didn't need to give way to anyone he saw when he went out. It was really damaging to a man's dignity that anyone could beat 8 of him with one hand. It was a pity that he couldn't recognize the words on it. Many of the words looked similar and he couldn't even remember them. After a while, Rinpoche helplessly placed the booklet back on the table. Looks like I'll have to wait until I learn how to read. When it was almost evening, Rinpoche was called into the hall to tell a story. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly heard the Empress's voice. "Are you going to disappear again tomorrow?" Rinpoche immediately broke out in a cold sweat. It was as if his body was petrified. He turned around with difficulty and forced a smile. "Your Majesty's eyes are like pearls, your foresight is like that of a deity, your wisdom is outstanding, your foresight is far-sighted, and you have the pearl of wisdom in your hands. I'm terrified and I'm in awe." "It's true that I'm terrified. As for the rest, it's hard to say," the Empress said coldly. "Forget it, I've said that as long as you do your best, I won't interfere. You may leave." After being beaten, Rinpoche escaped from the palace as if he had been pardoned. After leaving the palace, he heaved a sigh of relief and wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. In just a short while his back was drenched again. After going through the Empress's words in his mind, he was afraid that the words, "do my best," were what the Empress wanted to say. The matter of the salt well had to be put on the agenda as soon as possible. With the merits of the salt well and the sweet potatoes, his head would probably be more stable. Along the way he lowered his head and walked while thinking. In the darkness, his head directly hit a wall and he took 2 steps back. When he looked up, he realized that the wall was Caretaker Shur. "What's wrong? You look absent-minded," Caretaker Shur asked, startling a flock of birds in the surroundings. Rinpoche took another 2 steps back before he composed himself and said, "Nothing, I'm just thinking about something. How's the shaved ice shop?" Caretaker Shur immediately became happy when he mentioned this matter. He took 2 steps forward and almost slapped Rinpoche to the ground. After that he laughed heartily and said, "Brother Ren, you're awesome, huh? If we do as you say, the shop would be extremely busy for the next 2 days." Rinpoche rubbed his shoulder and grimaced in pain. Just now he wanted to dodge but failed. Caretaker Shur's movements were much faster than his. "As long as the business is good, it's good. However, don't slap me." Rinpoche saw Caretaker Shur raise his palm again and hurriedly jumped far away like a rabbit. Caretaker Shur laughed a few more times. It was obvious that he was really happy. Caretaker Shur stretched out his palm and said, "These 2 days we have been selling 1 to 200 bowls a day. It's a shop. A bowl cost 5 copper coins, so 1 million coins would be 5 taels of silver. In other words, they could earn 7 to 8 taels of silver a day, and the profit would be at least 60%. In other words, they could earn 4 to 5 taels of silver a day, and in a month, they would earn 100 taels of silver. As for the money for the shop and the labor, they did not have much left. After deducting them, they would have at least 80 taels of silver a month. The 2 shops added up to a total of 160 taels. If they split the profits, each person would get 80 taels. To Caretaker Shur, whose monthly salary was only 6 taels, it was equivalent to his annual salary. No wonder he was so happy. However, Rinpoche's attention was completely focused on Caretaker Shur's palm. No matter how hard he racked his brains, he could not figure out how Caretaker Shur's 5 fingers had anything to do with 1 or 2. Were the people of Dayo all like this? Just by gesturing a number he would stretch out all 5 fingers? After listening to Caretaker Shur's words, Rinpoche nodded his head slightly. Earning money was within his expectations. In fact, it was slightly less than what he had expected. After all, Dayo was so hot. This kind of shaved ice would definitely sell well. Some of the people who sold ice cream on the pedestrian streets in China earned quite a lot in a month. Furthermore, the weather here was even hotter. Furthermore, this was an exclusive business. Rinpoche reckoned that he would be able to sell more shaved ice cream after word of mouth spread. This would continue until the secret of saltpeter was discovered. Hire 2 more people. "I reckon this business will last for a period of time," Rinpoche said. "I will listen to you." Now that he saw the money, Caretaker Shur was immediately filled with heroism. He would do whatever Rinpoche said and was not worried at all. Chapter 63. When he woke up, he was back in his bedroom in China. When will it end? Rinpoche rubbed his face and sat up from the bed. He did not need to worry about China anymore. A collaboration with the Qin family for the black mud cream recipe was enough for him to eat for the rest of his life. Now he had to stabilize his position in Dayo. At the very least he wouldn't lose his head one day. After sitting on the bed in a daze for a while, he saw that the sky had already started to brighten. He opened the window and a gust of cold wind blew in. "It's getting colder," Rinpoche muttered to himself. The time between the two sides was not equal. Basically, a round trip would take 12 days and 3 trips would take more than a month. He only felt that 10 days had passed, but in reality, a month had passed. Therefore he felt that the climate change was particularly abrupt. Another reason was that after returning from that world, he felt that the air in the city was especially turbid and had a pungent smell. This made him more and more reluctant to go out. After standing in front of the window in a daze for a while, Rinpoche thought that it would be great if he could see the profits from the black mud cream earlier. At that time he could buy a small island and live on it without having to endure this turbid air. However, he also knew that the black mud cream was destined to take a long time to reap results. 3 to 5 years was considered short. Not to mention the research and development of the drug and the subsequent experiments, just building a pharmaceutical factory from scratch was not a simple task. It seemed that he still had to think of ways to earn more money. Distant water cannot quench present thirst. After thinking about it, he realized that there wasn't anything that he could bring back to Dayo to make money from. Would he dare to sell pandas? Even he didn't dare to use the sharp-toothed tiger's skin. There was no such creature on Earth. The closest one was the sword-thorn tiger, which had gone extinct hundreds of millions of years ago. Basically, whatever they had on Earth, they didn't dare to take it out, or even if they did, they wouldn't have much value. He didn't dare to take out things that Earth didn't have. Unless it was something like a prescription, but the benefits were still too slow. He could earn about 80 taels of silver a month. Including the shop that was still under renovation, he could earn about 100 taels of silver, which was about 40 to 50,000 taels of silver. With the addition of the air cooler, he might be able to earn more. However, there seemed to be a risk in selling silver in large quantities over a long period of time. For an ordinary person, 4 to 500,000 yuan a year was a lot, but for the current Rinpoche, it was like a drop in the bucket. Worrying about selling whey powder and earning money from selling cabbages. This was the kind of person who said this. Rinpoche suddenly recalled that Dayo seemed to have a lot of gemstones. He wondered if he could find out more about them after he returned to Dayo. It would be more feasible to bring back some gems. It would be best if the quantity was small but the value was huge. After being in a daze for a while, Rinpoche switched on his phone, which had been switched off all this while, to take a look. Just as he switched it on, a few missed calls and messages popped up. 2 from Qin Qing, 1 from Dong Haiqing, 1 from Qin Bing and 1 from his family. He dialed the number back and as soon as the call connected, he heard someone scolding him. "You still know how to call back. I called you but your phone was turned off. I couldn't find you. If you didn't call me back, I would have called the police and reported you missing." Rinpoche moved the phone away from his ear. After a long time, he waited for the person on the other side to finish scolding him before saying, "Recently, the company has been rather busy. I work overtime every day and didn't notice that my phone ran out of battery. I just finished my work today, so I called to greet you." "Oh, you even know how to use words?" Rinpoche's mother mumbled before asking, "How's the situation at the company?" "Very good, it's getting better and better." Rinpoche changed to a relaxed tone. "Forget it, I don't know about those things. Today is the Mid-Autumn Festival, are you coming back?" "It's still not too late to take a taxi." "Today is the Mid-Autumn Festival?" Rinpoche asked doubtfully. "Have you been living a stupid life? You don't even know the date?" "Oh, I've been too busy recently and didn't notice. I'll set off now and we'll be back in the afternoon," Rinpoche replied hurriedly. "That's more like it. Come back soon." After hanging up the phone, Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that only a few days had passed. More than 2 months had passed. He had a look of resentment on his face. When was he going to end? However, after thinking about it, if he really transmigrated to that world and couldn't return, he didn't know how sad his family would be. Rinpoche felt that the current situation wasn't too bad. Rinpoche looked at Qin Qing's missed calls and suddenly remembered that Qin Qing's engagement date was approaching. It was a pity that he didn't have anything good to give him. Qin Qing had money and didn't seem to lack anything. After thinking about it, Rinpoche decided not to call him back. After washing up, he changed his clothes, went downstairs and drove home. Rinpoche's hometown was about 300 kilometers away. He arrived at his neighborhood in the afternoon. Looking at the familiar but slightly dilapidated neighborhood, Rinpoche felt an inexplicable sense of comfort. This was the feeling of home. Brother, brother. Rinpoche heard someone shouting and looked up. He saw his brother waving at him from the window. Rinpoche smiled, locked his car, went upstairs and knocked on the door. Is the Audi downstairs yours? Rinpoche's father asked as soon as he opened the door. Your eyesight is really good. Rinpoche gave him a thumbs up. Nonsense, it's not like you don't know that I have telescopic vision. Rinpoche's father gave him a slap on the head. Give me the keys, I'll go for a stroll. Rinpoche smiled and threw the keys to his father. He knew that his father had always liked cars, but he had 2 children to support. After so many years, he had only bought a second-hand Alto to use as a means of transportation. Therefore, when he saw this car, he couldn't help but feel excited. Look at you, it's just a car, what's so good about driving? His mother's voice came from the kitchen. His father ignored her, took the keys and rushed out excitedly. Brother, do you have a gift for me? Rinpoche's brother surrounded him as soon as his father left. Rinpoche's brother, Rinwanyin, was in his 3rd year of high school this year. He was taller than him, more handsome, had good grades and was cheerful. It seemed that all the good points of the family were concentrated on him. However, between the 2 brothers, one was Rinpoche and the other was Rinwanyin. It could be seen that their parents had high expectations for them. Regarding this expectation, Rinpoche only wanted to say, I really can't do it. I'll buy you a mobile phone tomorrow. Rinpoche looked at his brother's height and the fact that he could definitely rely on his looks to make a living. He couldn't help but feel envious and jealous. Thank you, brother. Rinwanyin immediately beamed with joy. Rinpoche put down the things, went into the kitchen and saw that they were all his favorite dishes. It seemed like they had just started cooking. It seemed that his mother had been preparing for the whole morning and was waiting for him to come home. She was afraid that he wouldn't be able to eat hot food. Since you are back, go to one side and don't be a hindrance. His mother's words threw the little bit of warmth that had just risen in Rinpoche's heart into the gutter. He touched his nose and went to sit on the sofa. Brother, what does your company do? Rinwanyin moved to Rinpoche's side and asked. Medicine. Medicine? Brother, when did you learn about this? Rinwanyin asked curiously. Your brother knows a lot. Rinpoche had a proud look on his face. Chapter 64. Not long after, when the dishes were ready, his father also came back at the right time. He opened his mouth and asked, How much is your car? Rinpoche looked at the kitchen and gestured 6. He didn't dare to say anything as he was afraid that his mother would hear him and nag him again. It's indeed promising, but it's too extravagant. Your company has just been established and we don't know what the future holds. Don't just think about enjoying life. You should keep more money by your side so that you can make a comeback if anything happens, Rinpoche's father said. How much do you have in your pockets? I'll leave the 300,000 here. Take it back if you need it. There's still a few 100,000 left. Don't worry, it's enough. There's nothing to spend money on right now. We just have to wait for the subsequent profits. Didn't we agree last time? I'll provide the technology and the others will provide the money. Rinpoche laughed. In his heart, he knew that his father was saying these words of wisdom. Indeed, 2 million yuan could not do much. With the remaining money, he could hold on until the pharmaceutical factory was built and the medicine was on the market. However, if something happened to his family, he would be at a loss. It seemed that he still had to find a way to earn more money, like what he had thought in the morning. While they were eating, Rinpoche's mother asked him with a kind face, You are quite successful now, but you are already so old. Do you have a girlfriend? Rinpoche was at a loss. I'm only 24 years old, what do you mean by that? Your Aunt Huang has a niece. She's pretty and tall. Do you want to get to know her? I think I can find someone better. Rinpoche quickly rejected her. He was only 24 and he was running around in 2 different worlds. How was he supposed to find a girlfriend? Disappearing for 8 to 10 days every 3 days? If that was the case, it would be more reliable for him to find a wife there than on Earth. At the thought of this, Rinpoche felt even more resentful. Over there, even a woman could beat him up with one hand. Listening to his mother's nagging, Rinpoche almost buried his face in his bowl. All he could hear was Auntie Huang's daughter. So what? You set your sights higher after earning money. How is Auntie Huang's daughter suitable for marriage? He didn't expect that he would have such a day. And in the foreseeable future, there would be many more days like this. After the meal, Rinpoche ran back to the house as if he was fleeing for his life. The next day, Rinpoche brought Ren Wanyin to buy the latest mobile phone, and Ren Wanyin was beaming with joy. Remember, when you see a good cabbage, you have to take it first. Don't be like me. When I was in school, I wouldn't allow any contact with girls even if I was beaten to death. After I graduated, I couldn't wait to hug a grandchild. Rinpoche pulled Ren Wanyin's hand with a face full of resentment. Ren Wanyin rolled his eyes and laughed heartily. Anyway, even if the sky falls down, there will be someone taller to hold it up. You are the elder brother and you are not married yet. Why should I be anxious? Rinpoche was speechless. He had become a shield. However, when he thought about how it would be like this every time he returned home, he felt a headache coming on. It seemed like he would have to rent a girlfriend if he didn't want to be nagged. He didn't know if she was reliable or not. After staying at home for 2 days, he drove back early in the morning on the third day. In the afternoon, he went to the supermarket and bought quite a lot of White Rabbit creamy candies. All of this was to bribe librarian Lin Xiaola. Normally, little girls would like this, right? Like a weird uncle, Rinpoche pondered over how to make the little girl happy. After all, being illiterate was not an easy life. He guarded so many scrolls, but he couldn't understand a single one of them. After buying a bunch of White Rabbit creamy candies, he went to buy 2 electric batons and charged them at home before returning Qin Qing's call. You finally called back. Otherwise, I would have reported you to the police and reported you missing. Rinpoche smiled bitterly. This was basically the same reaction. How are the preparations for your engagement with Jiang Nan going? Rinpoche asked with a smile. On the 8th of next month you should be fine by then, right? Don't miss it, Qin Qing whispered. Rinpoche could tell from his voice that he was probably with a girl now. After calculating the time, including today, there were still 10 days left. By then he would be back. Only then did he say, "Don't worry, I won't miss it." All right then, I won't say any more. Qin Qing hung up the phone after finishing his sentence. Rinpoche shook his head. They were getting engaged in 10 days and he was still fooling around outside. It must have been hard on Jiang Nan to actually tolerate him. Rinpoche hoped that after the engagement, Qin Qing would change his mind. Thinking about Qin Qing's character, he was usually quite reliable and should be able to do it. This was the last time he would go crazy before the engagement. At night, Rinpoche directly returned to that world with a bunch of White Rabbit creamy candies and 2 electric batons. After waking up in the morning, he inserted the 2 electric batons into his waist. Rinpoche felt that he was like a Jedi, except for the fact that the 2 electric batons were a little short and small. Just when he was feeling satisfied in the house, he saw a black shadow moving up and down by the window. From the shadow, it had a fat head and big ears, and the ears were even on top of its head. When he opened the door, he saw Tian Tian lying on the floor and Gun Gun stepping on its body, trying to think of a way to open the window. After seeing Rinpoche, Tian Tian immediately got up and walked away. It didn't care that there was a fellow on its body. Just like that, Gun Gun's stool was taken away. It fell head first onto the floor and rolled around. After shaking its head for a long time, it crawled over and hugged Rinpoche's thigh, shaking it continuously. Rinpoche teased the 2 little fellows for a while and went to get a basket of bamboo leaves for them. In the morning he went to the fields for a walk. When he was about to return, he saw a badly battered caretaker striding towards Rinpoche. As he walked he shouted, "Brother Rin, why can't you use your sect's secret treasure?" "Can't use it?" Rinpoche was slightly puzzled. "Let me take a look. Also, what happened to your face?" Rinpoche took it and immediately poked it at caretaker Shi. The badly battered caretaker Shi looked at Rinpoche and laughed heartily. He almost slapped Rinpoche into the ground again. "It's out of battery." Rinpoche hid far away from him and said doubtfully, "Logically speaking, it should be able to be recharged more than 10 times. Why did it run out so quickly? How do you charge it? Do you want to be struck by lightning during a thunderstorm to recharge?" Caretaker Shi asked curiously. Rinpoche looked at him silently. Be struck by lightning during a thunderstorm to recharge? Good idea. Li Yuanba probably had the same idea. The 2 of them must have a common language. However, the ancient people knew too little about electricity. Their knowledge was also very simple. It was normal for them to think this way. Why did it run out so quickly? Rinpoche asked. He was curious about what caretaker Shi did with this thing. He thought about Caretaker Shi's character. His 2 eyes were like national treasures. His face and the corners of his mouth were swollen with blood clots. Ren Baqin felt that something must have happened. Sure enough, it was as Ren Baqin expected. When Caretaker Shi heard Ren Baqin's question, he laughed heartily. With a proud look on his face he said, "Those fellows still dared to show off to me. I fought against 8 of them." He could not even recognize his face. "Brother Ren, they are too shameless. 8 of them are ganging up on me." Caretaker Shi pulled Ren Baqin's hand and complained. "Previously you said that you could defeat all 8 of them by yourself." Ren Baqin couldn't help but complain. "I fought them one by one. Along the way I fought against 8 of them. How can it be the same when the 8 of them attacked me together?" Caretaker Shi sighed. "Forget it, let's find it next time." Ren Baqin had no choice but to comfort her. "Your sect's secret treasure." "No, it's just that one. The other one ran out of battery because of you." Ren Baqin threw Caretaker Shi aside and ran over to scoop rice. Needless to say, that electric baton must have fallen into someone else's hands. Ignoring Caretaker Shi's bruised and swollen face, the others also turned a blind eye. It was common for men in Dayo to be in such a situation. They even teased him a little. "First I fought against 8 of them. I punched the public order division and kicked Swajun. Then the 8 of them attacked me together. I was outnumbered." Caretaker Shi refused to relent and insisted that he once fought against 8 of them. The odd job workers in the courtyard roared with laughter. The hierarchy in this world wasn't that strict. These odd job workers were like company employees while Caretaker Shi was like the company manager. Both parties could still make harmless jokes. This made Ren Baqin feel rather comfortable. After lunch, Ren Baqin carried half a bag of white rabbit creamy candies and entered the palace. While walking he threw one into his mouth. Tasted pretty good. It had a strong milky fragrance. No wonder it had lasted for so many years. He chewed as he walked. When he arrived at Qingxin Palace Hall, Ren Baqin liked to chew. He found it troublesome to keep it in his mouth. Lin Xiaola sat on the chair. This time she finally heard the sound of Ren Baqin opening the door. She drowsily opened her eyes. After seeing that it was Ren Baqin, she yawned and prepared to continue sleeping. "This is for you." Ren Baqin took out 3 white rabbit creamy candies and threw them on the table. "What's that?" Lin Xiaola finally opened her eyes when she heard about food. It seemed that foodies weren't just an attribute of Earthlings. It was the same for people from the other world. Looking at the 3 little things on the table, Lin Xiaola snorted, "Humph, you want to bribe me with these things? This is for you. Try it. I'm sure you haven't eaten it before." Ren Baqin took out another candy from his bosom, removed the wrapper and threw it into his mouth. He looked like he was trying to abduct a little girl. Lin Xiaola looked disgusted. Her hands moved quickly and copied Ren Baqin's actions. She removed the wrapper and threw it into her mouth. Lin Xiaola's eyes widened. She looked like she had eaten something good. She wiped the table with her claws and the 2 candies were gone. Then she said to Ren Baqin with an unclear voice, "What do you want to do?" "Teach me how to read," Ren Baqin replied. "I knew you were up to no good. 100 a day. This thing." Lin Xiaola immediately fell under the taste of the white rabbit creamy candies. She showed 2 of them to Ren Baqin and haggled. 10. This thing is very rare. You haven't seen it before, right? How can you make 100 such exquisite candies a day?" Ren Baqin said. 100 candies wasn't a lot. 1.5 bags were worth about 40 yuan. It was much cheaper than hiring a teacher. However, he still had to bring them over from the real world. Furthermore, it was quite troublesome to bring a bag of candies into the palace every time. 50. Lin Xiaola hesitated for a long time. Finally, she stretched out her hand and spread her 5 fingers. Ren Baqin was gratified. She was indeed literate. He finally met someone who could count. However, he said, 15. I really can't have too many. It's too troublesome to make them. Finally, after haggling, they settled on 20 pieces of candies a day. After that, Ren Baqin was elated. He could finally learn how to read. "Let's start today. Tomorrow, I will sleep for a while more." Lin Xiaola immediately closed her eyes and laid her head on the table. 20. What about here? Ren Baqin helplessly took out a handful of white rabbit creamy candies. "Yes." Lin Xiaola immediately opened her eyes wide. "Teach me how to read first," Ren Baqin said. "Give me this first." Lin Xiaola didn't back down this time. "I will give you 10 first. I will give you the rest after I finish learning today." Ren Baqin continued to haggle like a hawker for a few candies. Qing Yuan covered her mouth and chuckled as she took the handful of sweets away. The Empress looked at Ren Baqin and said, "At least you know what's going on. What's this called?" "Milk candies." Ren Baqin wiped off his sweat. Fortunately, he had brought more today. Sometimes he would also eat a piece. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy for him to get through tonight. "From now on, I'll give you 1 dough every month," the Empress said casually. "Yes," Ren Baqin answered honestly with his head lowered. A bucket weighed more than 6 caddies. 1 bucket per month. Was this person eating candy like rice? In the future, the Empress would toss white rabbit creamy candy into her mouth before she fought with anyone. This didn't seem right. When he was talking about the investiture of the gods today, Ren Baqin noticed that the Empress's mouth didn't seem to be idle. Every now and then she would put a white rabbit creamy candy into her mouth. Furthermore, looking at her expression, she seemed to be enjoying it. This made Ren Baqin suddenly realize that this Empress had a special characteristic. She loved to eat sweets. Previously she loved to eat steamed pork and double scoop and the like. At this moment, Ren Baqin felt that some of the Empress's gluttonous traits seemed to have awakened. He hoped that in the future she wouldn't find trouble with him when she had a toothache from eating candy. "You said that you are also proficient in poetry, right?" the Empress suddenly asked when he was about to leave after he finished his story. Without waiting for him to reply, she continued, "I remember now. Bright moonlight in front of the window, 2 pairs of shoes on the ground. Was this what you recited at that time? Damn it." Upon hearing this, Ren Baqin finally knew why he was almost dragged out and beheaded when he first met her. It's a slip of the tongue, a slip of the tongue. Bright moonlight in front of the bed, suspected to be frost on the ground, 2 pairs of shoes on the ground. Ren Baqin's forehead was full of sweat again. "In a few days some people will be delivering gifts. When the time comes, you will help to receive them," the Empress said coldly. "Yes, Your Majesty." Ren Baqin was slightly stunned. He didn't expect that he would be given such a task. However, he still hurriedly agreed to it. Following which, the Empress sat on the couch and frowned. Ren Baqin had no choice but to wait for her. When the time comes, if there is someone, suppress their arrogance. If you do a good job, you will be rewarded. After a while, the Empress's voice continued to be heard. "If you lose the face of Dayo, you should know the consequences." Ren Baqin was puzzled. What did she skip at the beginning? If there is someone, suppress their arrogance? However, the latter part of the Empress's words made his heart tighten. He knew that the Empress in front of him was definitely not joking with him. He quickly raised his head and asked, "Your Majesty, may I know who is coming?" "What's the matter?" "You will know when the time comes. I will get someone to inform you and arrange an identity for you." After the Empress finished speaking, she waved her hand and said, "You may leave." After Ren Baqin left the palace, his mind was still at a loss. What kind of person? Suppress their arrogance? It should be easy to receive them. The most troublesome thing was to suppress the other party's arrogance. From the Empress's tone, it seemed that she didn't like the people who came. Otherwise, she wouldn't have asked him to suppress their arrogance. But who was the other party? What was his identity? How could he suppress them? Ren Baqin had no idea about any of these. However, after combining the Empress's last sentence, Ren Baqin understood something. In any case, he couldn't lose the face of Dayo. If he did so, he would definitely suffer. As for the rest, he had to understand what was going on first. After returning to the Beast Park, Ren Baqin immediately went to look for Caretaker Shi. "What's going to happen during this period of time?" Ren Baqin asked. Caretaker Shi was a little confused. He didn't understand what Ren Baqin meant. "Today, Her Majesty said that someone will be coming to deliver gifts during this period of time." Caretaker Shi pondered for a long time and counted with his fingers. Finally, he came to a realization and patted Ren Baqin's shoulder. "So, it's Her Majesty's birthday celebration." "Ah. Every year, many people from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Qin Nation will come to celebrate Her Majesty's birthday. Many of them are the sons of those so-called aristocratic families. However, their physiques are like little chicks. It's not enough for me to strangle them." Ren Baqin felt that his physique was like that of a little chick. However, why are they coming to celebrate Her Majesty's birthday? Ren Baqin was puzzled. If the officials from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Qin Nation were here to deliver gifts, it would be understandable. However, what were those so-called aristocratic families doing here? Chapter 67. After hearing Caretaker Shi's explanation, Rinpoche immediately understood. Occupation, Empress. Strength, 7th in the world. Wealth, owns an entire nation. Appearance, fair skin, beautiful and alluring. Such a person, no matter where she was placed, would be a proper fair, rich and beautiful lady among fair, rich and beautiful ladies. It was very normal for people to have designs on the Empress. Therefore, every time the Empress celebrated her birthday, there would be many rich and powerful people from the other 3 nations rushing to Dayo. Every one of them was like livestock in heat, trying to get the Empress's attention. This was the only time they could come into contact with the Empress. Rinpoche also understood why the Empress asked him to help with the reception. After all, these people were here to deliver gifts. She couldn't possibly let them stay in an inn by themselves. She had to make some arrangements as the Empress still wanted to save face. However, even though this group of people were here to deliver gifts, some of them definitely annoyed the Empress. She had been wanting to slap them for a long time. For some reason she didn't say much about this matter, so she skipped a sentence. However, her meaning was clear. No matter what, they couldn't embarrass Dayo. This sentence was more particular. How was this considered embarrassing Dayo? If the Aboriginals were to do this, they would probably talk about how big their fists were when they were talking about poems and songs. When they were talking about romance, they would compare whose legs were thicker. After all, it was the Empress's birthday celebration. They couldn't possibly be bruised and swollen. Therefore, a talent, like him who suddenly appeared in front of the Empress, was used as a substitute. She didn't care how good he was. In any case, it was like this every year. No matter how bad he was, he wouldn't be worse than the previous years. Therefore, he simply put himself on the stage. Thinking about the people who might come, he reckoned that they were the elites of the younger generation. Those who weren't confident would definitely not come. The Empress actually asked him to suppress these people? Rinpoche felt that it would be good if he wasn't suppressed by them. If he was not careful, he would become a prop or a stepping stone for them to show off. In an instant, Rinpoche felt unwell. Thinking about the Empress's words, Rinpoche felt that if he really became a stepping stone, the Empress would make him a stepping stone for the rest of his life. Thinking about that, damn it, I will fight it out with them. Rinpoche's face was full of murderous intent. What are we fighting for? Caretaker Shi raised his head blankly. When is Her Majesty's birthday celebration? Rinpoche asked. There's still 1 more month, probably? Caretaker Shi replied uncertainly. Why did His Majesty mention this to you today? Even though the people he would be facing might be elites from various clans in other countries, he was still a university graduate. He couldn't possibly be inferior to a few elites from a feudal society. There was still some time left. Next time he would go back and memorize 300 Tang and Song poems. He didn't believe that the crystallization of the wisdom of the ancients couldn't defeat a few elites from a few clans. Even though he could also make their eyeballs pop out of their sockets when he competed with them in mathematics, the final result would probably be like a chicken talking to a duck. There wasn't much meaning to it. The next day Rinpoche arrived at Qingshin Palace Hall. After seeing Lin Xiaola, he had a look of hidden bitterness on his face. He was wondering if he should bring her poop-flavored chocolate or chocolate-flavored poop next time. Why are you looking at me like that? Lin Xiaola asked unnaturally when she saw Rinpoche's resentful gaze. Rinpoche thought for a while and didn't say anything. After all, as a man he couldn't be calculative with a little girl. It would give people the impression that he was narrow-minded. Even though he was indeed narrow-minded. He decided to bring her chocolate-flavored poop. The other party wasn't a fool. She probably wouldn't eat poop-flavored chocolate. Let's continue. Rinpoche pulled a stool over and sat directly opposite her. Seeing that he didn't say anything, Lin Xiaola heaved a sigh of relief. She was still a little nervous just now. Even though she felt that this feeling was very baffling. Rinpoche spent the entire afternoon learning a few dozen words. At the end of the lesson he also reviewed what he learned yesterday. Seeing that he hadn't forgotten anything, Rinpoche immediately felt very satisfied. At night, he went to the palace to tell a story as usual. At the same time he gave the Empress a bag of white rabbit creamy candy. This made the Empress rather satisfied. She felt that Rinpoche was rather tactful and found him increasingly pleasing to the eye. It wouldn't be a problem for a bunch of burly men in the imperial court to lead troops into battle. However, it would be difficult for them to be tactful and tactful. Following the birth of Neza, the evisceration of his father, the lotus incarnation, Jiangzia's descent from the mountain, and the burning of the Pipa spirit, the story became more and more exciting. Even the empress rarely interrupted him. Instead, she concentrated on listening to the story. From time to time, she would put a piece of white rabbit creamy candy in her mouth. One person told the story while the other three listened. Sometimes the fire in the palace flickered due to the wind. Rinpoche suddenly felt that this kind of atmosphere was a little suitable for telling a ghost story. However, when he thought about the empress's fighting strength, Rinpoche felt that it was better to forget this idea as soon as possible. Chapter 68. When he woke up again, it was already early in the morning. Looking at the sky that was just starting to brighten, Rinpoche lay in bed for a long time before getting up. Today was Qin Qing's engagement day. No matter what, he had to make a trip there. The two work suits in the wardrobe could no longer be worn. Rinpoche measured his body size and realized that he had gained at least 10 kilograms recently. Originally, he was around 120 kilograms, but now he was at least 130 kilograms. His meals were all meat from morning to night. It would be strange if he didn't get fat. On Earth, Rinpoche's physique was just right. However, in Dayo, according to caretaker Shi, he was as thin and weak as a chicken. He casually put on some clothes and went out for breakfast. Then he went to buy a blue suit, which cost him a few thousand yuan. It was not very expensive, but it was quite suitable for him. After that, he gave Qin Qing a call to ask about the engagement date. When he found out that it was night time, Rinpoche ran to the supermarket and bought a huge pile of white rabbit creamy candies and various kinds of chocolates, including 15 kilograms of white rabbit creamy candies and various kinds of chocolates. He spent about 2,000 yuan. After stuffing these things into the trunk, Rinpoche went to buy 300 poems of the Tang dynasty and 300 poems of the Song dynasty. Since the empress had personally instructed him to do so, he didn't dare to be careless. He planned to memorize it and see if anyone dared to act pretentiously, he would rebuke them. After sending everything home, Rinpoche lay on the sofa and groaned. He felt that the sofa on Earth was much more comfortable than the stool in that world. It was extremely hard. If he wanted to make a sofa, he would have to wait for some time for the leather to be tanned. Looking at the time, it would take another 8 to 10 days. At that time, he would send a set to the empress and then make a long set to put in his room. That way he would have a place to lie down at night. After lying on the sofa for a while, he got up to charge the electric baton and uploaded the photos to his computer. Then he registered a new Weibo account called Starting from Zero and uploaded the photos of Tian Tian and Gun Gun. Some were sleeping, some were fooling around, some were throwing a tantrum, and some were hugging his thighs. There were 20 to 30 pictures in a row. After that, he selected a few photos of the Beast Park that he felt were pretty good and uploaded them. Regardless of whether or not anyone paid attention to this Weibo post, it was still a record of his time in the other world. After doing all these, Rinpoche took out 300 poems of the Tang dynasty and started to recite it. If he wanted to follow the empress's instructions and use the soles of his shoes to slap people's faces, he had to first memorize it thoroughly. A month's time was neither long nor short. 3 days in the real world was equivalent to 1 day in the other world. In the other world he could return 6 or 7 times a month. The time in the two worlds added together was about 1.5 months. But time was still tight. He had to work hard to show off and slap faces. Wait a minute, did he remember something wrong? Suddenly, a thought flashed across Rinpoche's mind. Something seemed to be amiss. First, the empress's birthday was in a month's time. Caretaker Shi's estimate was just about right. Secondly, the feudal society was not like the modern society. At that time, transportation was not developed. Ordinary people would not be far from home for their entire lives. A long journey would easily take 10 days to half a month, and they would not even be in the same country. For a big event like the empress's birthday, they would definitely set off in advance. As such, there was an 80% chance that they would arrive in advance as well. It would be normal for them to arrive 10 days or even half a month earlier. There was not much time left for Rinpoche. If there were people who would arrive a month earlier, Rinpoche was afraid that he would have to go into battle immediately. This was not just a matter of urgency, it was simply a matter of life and death. At the thought of this, Rinpoche immediately jumped up from the sofa. He held onto a book and memorized it by rote for the entire afternoon. He had never worked so hard even when he was in school. This level of hard work could only be compared to the college entrance examination. After half a day, Rinpoche felt dizzy and put down the book. After resting for a while, he changed his clothes and headed to the hotel where Qin Qing and Jiang Nan were getting engaged. When he reached the entrance, he saw Qin Qing in a red suit and Jiang Nan in a red dress. Both of them were standing at the entrance to welcome the guests. Qin Qing came from a wealthy family. Even though Jiang Nan's family was not as wealthy, her parents were both professors and could be considered as a scholarly family. Both of them stood there. They were indeed a talented couple. Yes, as mentioned previously, Jiang Nan was not considered beautiful, but she had an exceptionally attractive intellectual and tranquil charm. Upon seeing Ren Baqin, Qin Qing laughed heartily and came over to give him a hug. "The present is me. You have everything that I have and everything that I don't." Ren Baqin spread his hands and said. He really did not think of anything to give to Qin Qing. "You are very secretive now. It's good that you are here." Qin Qing smiled and patted his shoulder. Ren Baqin grimaced in pain. Qin Qing did not use much strength, but his shoulder had been patted by caretaker Sure a few times and was already bruised. "Congratulations, Jiang Nan." Ren Baqin greeted Jiang Nan again. "I finally get to see the two of you." Jiang Nan's face was filled with happiness. She pursed her lips and smiled, "Thank you. However, I have not seen you for a while. I've been very busy recently, you know that." Ren Baqin spread his hands and joked. "Busy eating? You have gained so much weight." Ren Baqin laughed heartily. After greeting the two of them, Ren Baqin was brought inside and arranged to sit at a table next to the main table. The two families did not organize the engagement too extravagantly. It was just about 4 to 5 tables of relatives and friends who had a good relationship with each other. "Xiaoren, you're here." Qin Qing's father greeted him when he saw him. "Uncle. Call me Baqin. Otherwise it sounds like you are scolding me." Ren Baqin said helplessly. This caused Qin Qing's father to laugh heartily. However, it was, after all, an engagement banquet for both parties. There was no time for him to entertain Ren Baqin. Father Chen's main focus was on greeting Jiang Nan's family and getting to know them better. Ren Baqin sipped his tea at the side. In his mind, he was silently reciting the 300 Tang poems that he had memorized in the afternoon to deepen his memory. Following which, Ren Baqin was in a daze. Occasionally he would come back to his senses and look at Qin Qing and Jiang Nan's joyful faces. He wished them well in his heart. After attending the engagement banquet, Ren Baqin thought about how his mother almost made him go on a blind date 2 days ago. He shook his head slightly. If his situation did not change, he would not be able to find a girlfriend. When he walked out of the hotel, Ren Baqin shrunk his neck as the wind blew at him. The weather was indeed cold. He quickly got into the car and switched on the air conditioner. After a while he felt a little warmer. After driving home, he turned on his computer and took a look at his newly registered Weibo account. Even though it did not matter if anyone noticed this Weibo account, he still hoped that some people would see it and follow it. After all, it was his footprints from another world. After logging into his account, Ren Baqin saw that there were hundreds of likes and more than 10 comments. He was somewhat happy. He opened up the comments and browsed through them. Almost all of them were asking if he was working at a zoo or which zoo he was in. There were only 2 comments that said that the scenery was pretty good. They asked where he was and wanted to take a look. Sure enough, national treasures were the most attractive. The next day Ren Baqin memorized books for the whole day. In the afternoon he felt dizzy and his brain was like a lump of paste. He threw the books aside and went downstairs to drive around. He could relax a little. He wandered around the city aimlessly. When he passed by a corner, he saw a plainly dressed girl walking in front of him with many bags. He sighed in his heart. A few months ago he was also struggling to survive in the city like this. He didn't drive very fast. When he passed by, he turned his head to take a look. She looked pretty. The next second he felt that she looked familiar. He pondered for a while and couldn't match the person in his memory. He noticed a red hearing aid on her ear and suddenly remembered who she was. Chapter 71. Ren Baqin did not learn for long before the Imperial Guard named Xenja brought the medicine to the 2nd floor. After she came down, she pointed at Ren Baqin and said, "Follow me to see Her Majesty." He pushed the pen and paper to the side, got up and followed Xenja. Behind him, Lin Xiaola was fuming as she looked at his back view. After snorting twice, she reluctantly put away the pen and paper. For the sake of Ren Baqin's white rabbit creamy candies every day. The familiar path was the same palace that he always went to. After entering, he found that a burly man in an official uniform was already standing inside. However, it was a little different from his own. The main body was black with a beast pattern on it, and the collar was yellow. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Rinpoche stopped one step behind that person and bowed. That burly man turned his head to look at Rinpoche and asked with a grin, "Your Majesty, is this the guy? This is the storyteller of Qingshin Palace Hall. This time he will accompany you in receiving those people." The cold voice of the Empress came from above. "That's good. I think those people are already very annoyed. All of them don't have much ability and are a bunch of fart. If it weren't for the fact that they came to give gifts, they would have already cut off their heads and kicked them like a ball." The big man laughed loudly. "Rinpoche, this is the Honglu Vice Minister. From tomorrow onwards you can report to him. You don't have to go to Qingshin Palace Hall for the time being. As for the position, it would be in the Honglu Bureau. Gu Daxiong, are there any vacant positions?" The Empress asked from above. It had to be said that Gu Daxiong really lived up to his name. He looked like a bear with a huge body and a face full of stubble like a human bear. Rinpoche lowered his head. He knew about the Honglu Bureau, which was responsible for external reception and various etiquettes. It was equivalent to a foreign affairs department. Since he was responsible for the reception of those people, it was perfectly justifiable for him to have his name in this department. Honglu Junior official Gu Daxiong pondered for a moment before suggesting, "Why not we take up the position of Honglu Deputy? I remember that seat isn't empty, right?" The Empress asked. "I'll go back and give him a vacation. Anyway, he wants to quit long ago." Gu Daxiong grinned. Rinpoche was speechless as he listened from the side. There was actually such an operation? What an eye-opener. "He's called Qiji? I remember that he broke the legs of 4 people from the Yun Nation last year, and one of them even complained to me. So be it." The Empress's voice was heard, and both of them bowed in agreement. "How about this? If there's nothing else, you can leave." After the Empress finished speaking lazily, Qing Yuan, who was at the side, served a plate of grapes. The Empress plucked one and placed it in her mouth. "This subject shall take his leave." After Gu Daxiong finished speaking, he retreated. Before he left, he grinned at Rinpoche, revealing a mouthful of snow-white teeth that glistened under the illumination of the lights in the hall. "Come forward and continue your story." The Empress reclined on the couch. Her eyes were painted red, and her lips were as red as blood. When she plucked a grape and placed it in her mouth, her actions were extremely moving and made one's heart tremble. Rinpoche hurriedly lowered his head after taking a glance. He was so close to sticking his head into the ground. "Oh, storyteller Rin, raise your head and look straight at me. Why are you lowering your head?" The Empress chuckled, looking languid and unrestrained. Rinpoche raised his head to take a glance and almost lowered his head again. Normally the Empress was still fine. Even though she was beautiful, she was too cold and could only be observed from afar. However, today she was lying on the couch, wearing a red muslin, looking languid and charming. Her posture as she gently placed the grape in her mouth made him feel like he was being teased. He coughed awkwardly and said, "Your Majesty's beauty is unparalleled in the world, like the bright sun in the sky. I feel ashamed of my inferiority and find it hard to look straight at you." "Unparalleled in the world?" the Empress asked. "Yes, no one in the world can compare to you." Rinpoche lowered his head and replied. The celebrities on Earth were seen on TV every day. In terms of appearance they were similar, but their identities were different. This was the monarch of a nation. That kind of excitement made Rinpoche's heart jump up and down. If he were to jump any further, his heart would jump out. "You really know how to talk," the Empress said with a smile. "Tell me about investiture of the gods. The story of your nation is indeed interesting." "Yes," Rinpoche hurriedly responded. He opened his mouth for a long time and finally calmed himself down before he began to narrate the story. He only stopped when he reached the part where Baigan dug out his heart. According to usual practice, he should have stopped at this time. The lamp oil in the hall had been refilled several times. "Tell me another part." "I don't feel comfortable if I stop here," the Empress suddenly said. Rinpoche didn't expect the Empress to speak at this time. Today the Empress was much more human than usual and less cold. He hurriedly nodded his head in response. Fortunately, he had completed Investiture of the Gods. If he were to read those web novels where chapters were missing, he would probably be in trouble. He narrated until Grand Tutor went to the East Sea to quell the chaos. Finally he said, "If you want to know the outcome, listen to the next chapter." After finishing the story in one breath, he felt refreshed and could finally get off work. Then he wanted to give himself a slap. After all, she was the ruler of a nation and the seventh most powerful expert in the world. Her magnanimity was far beyond that of an ordinary person. Other people might not be as broad-minded as the Empress. If someone wanted to know his secret, he would be in trouble. It was better to get the mechanical blueprint of the clock and find someone to make it. More sophisticated processing equipment was not difficult to obtain. At most, he would wear one watch and give one to the Empress. He went to the kitchen and took a look around. When he saw that there was vegetable soup, he scooped a bowl of it and ate it together with some other grains. After that, he changed his clothes and brought Teng Hulu and Tai Dao to the Honglu Bureau. The Honglu Bureau was located in the Pearl Curtain district, not far from the Beihong district. Along the way they did not encounter any fights. However, when they arrived at the Pearl Curtain district, they met a few people from the Public Order Bureau who were pushing a few badly battered people. It seemed like they were going to be whipped for fighting. One of the burly men from the Public Order Bureau was slightly stunned when he saw Ren Baqin. Following which, he sized him up carefully, called out to the others and walked towards Ren Baqin. Ren Baqin? Ren Baqin smiled bitterly and nodded his head. Needless to say, he was definitely one of the 8 people who were beaten up by caretaker Shi. Did you give the thing to that bastard Shi Wanshan? That burly man's face immediately became unfriendly. I was robbed, I'm innocent. Ren Baqin said helplessly. Can you use the secret treasure of your sect? Lend it to me. Otherwise, let's draw a circle, that burly man shouted. Ren Baqin felt Teng Hulu and Tai Dao behind him take a step forward. He was satisfied. It was worth it to have these 2 underlings. In any case, it was enough for them to stand up for him when he was in trouble. He waved his hand behind him. Now that I'm the Honglu deputy, I can choose not to accept your challenge. Ren Baqin smiled casually. According to his understanding, the Honglu deputy should have a higher position than this burly man. He could choose not to accept the challenge just because his position was higher. It was fine if he was bullied by the Empress, but caretaker Shi was on good terms with him. Ren Baqin couldn't bully everyone. There's such a thing? That bastard Shi Wanshan didn't mention it before? Aren't you from the Beast Park? That burly man scratched his head in confusion. Ren Baqin cupped his hands and said, I'm about to report to the Honglu deputy. You are the first outsider to take up an official position in Dayo. Forget it, your position is higher than mine. That burly man looked at Ren Baqin and grinned. He didn't seem to mind at all, waved his hand at him and left. Ren Baqin looked at his back and shook his head slightly. This person wasn't bad. He was similar to the aboriginal men that Ren Baqin had met before, but a little vulgar. However, from his attitude, Ren Baqin could tell that if he didn't have an official position in Dayo, it would be difficult for him to do anything. The aboriginals weren't polite to outsiders. He shouldn't even think about being a wealthy man. Unless he went to another country, but it wouldn't necessarily be a good outcome. Therefore, it was better to cozy up to the Empress in the future. Based on his experience in the Beast Park and the palace, the Dayo people weren't averse to becoming one of their own after holding a position or official position. Regardless of whether it was caretaker Shi or a few other caretakers or even the odd job workers and their family members, they were all the same. It was the same for some of the people he met in the palace. Let's go. Ren Baqin gestured for the 2 people behind him to head to the Honglu deputy. Outside the Honglu deputy was a huge courtyard with a few tall buildings. From the main gate, one could see that there was a passageway leading to the back of the building. The 2 burly men at the entrance were dressed differently from the palace guards and the people from the Public Order Bureau that Ren Baqin had seen just now. It was a sleeveless shirt, revealing 2 thick, muscular arms. In addition, the 2 of them had ferocious faces and murderous eyes, which made it impossible for strangers to approach them. If one didn't know better, they would have thought that they were in prison. In a normal diplomatic department, wouldn't they find a few good-natured people who were easy to deal with? However, Dayo had specially placed 2 fiendish-looking men to guard the entrance. They couldn't wait to keep everyone out. They were simply a weirdo in the diplomatic department. This is the Honglu deputy. What's the matter? One of them stopped Ren Baqin and said fiercely, Look for Gu Shaoqing. Tell him that Ren Baqin is here to report, Ren Baqin said. Report. That person sized up Ren Baqin suspiciously. Wait a minute. The other person turned and entered the courtyard. Ren Baqin felt that he should have worn his official robes. Originally, he thought that there was no need to wear the official robes of the palace since he was here to report to the Honglu deputy. He didn't expect that there would be trouble everywhere. Previously, he didn't feel it when he was walking in the city. Today he really felt it. Not long after, that person came out and said, Go in, Sir Gu is waiting for you. Chapter 74. Gu Shou threw an official robe to Ren Baqian. If it was worn by someone else it might be just right or slightly loose, but if it was worn by Ren Baqian it would be unsightly. He held it in his hands and prepared to find a tailor shop to change it. Originally, Teng Hulu and Tai Dao were his two bodyguards. Now with Xiong Pai they were nothing. Standing in front of Xiong Pai one would have to look up to him. Although Teng Hulu and Tai Dao were not small, they were only about 1.75 meters tall, similar to Ren Baqian. It was just that their bodies were much more muscular and weighed at least 100 kilograms. But compared to Xiong Pai they were as thin and weak as chicks. Ren Baqian pressed on Xiong Pai's arm. It was as if it was made of steel. "Sir Ren, this is?" the two asked. "This is Xiong Pai. He will be following me for the next few days. Both of you can go back first," Ren Baqian said. "Deal with those animal hides as soon as possible. I still need them." The two nodded their heads. They were originally from the Beast Park. They followed Ren Baqian every day because it was easy for something to happen when Ren Baqian went out alone. With Xiong Pai by his side, the two of them had nothing to worry about. "What do you usually do in the division?" Ren Baqian asked Xiong Pai after the two of them left. "Drink, sleep and practice martial arts." Xiong Pai grinned. "Practice martial arts? What do you practice?" Ren Baqian asked with interest. "Deputy, you will know when you come." Xiong Pai led Ren Baqian around the row of houses. There was a field at the back. At this moment there were 5 or 6 people there. A few of them were practicing martial arts. Their movements were very fast and powerful. There was also someone lifting a stone block. It was the kind that weighed 100 kilograms. He raised it horizontally and put it down again and again. When Ren Baqian arrived he saw that the other party was sweating profusely. He had done more than 30 stone blocks in a row and was still the same. Ren Baqian did not know how many stone blocks he had done. "What do you usually do?" Ren Baqian asked. He was curious about Xiong Pai's strength. After all, there were not many people with such a physique in Dayo. Although physique did not represent strength, Gu Daxiong had specially asked Xiong Pai to follow him. Presumably Xiong Pai's strength was top-notch. "My lord, please watch from the side lest you get hurt." Xiong Pai grinned and walked to the side. There was a big stone that was 1 meter square. He directly hugged it with both hands and shouted loudly. He lifted the huge stone up to his eyebrows and slowly put it down. Then he raised it again and put it down again. Ren Baqian, who was standing at the side, opened his mouth and was almost stunned by him. One had to know that a 1 meter square stone weighed 2 to 3 tons, and he lifted it just like that? Moreover, he raised and lowered it several times. Finally, with a loud shout, he directly threw the stone over his head, throwing it 2 to 3 meters high. "Damn." Ren Baqian couldn't help but speak. If it landed like that, an ordinary person would have been smashed into a meat patty. It would be easier for Ren Baqian to accept if he were to toss 200 to 150 kilograms into the air. But this was 2 to 3 tons, almost the weight of a car. Xiong Pai, on the other hand, caught it calmly and steadily. He only pressed his legs down a little to cushion the impact. Then he threw the stone up again and caught it again. When Xiong Pai threw the stone for fun, the other player couldn't play anymore. He got a stone that weighed 100 or 200 kilograms, but Xiong Pai got a stone that was 20 times the size. How could he play? It was embarrassing. "All right, stop," Ren Baqian hurriedly shouted. Looking at Xiong Pai's training movements made him a little dizzy. His heart was trembling and he always felt that if he missed, a freshly made pizza would appear in front of him. If Xiong Pai were to dye his entire body green he could become the Hulk. Wouldn't it attract suspicion? Upon hearing Ren Baqian's shout, Xiong Pai immediately turned around and walked away. He didn't even catch the stone and smashed it on the ground, causing the entire ground to tremble. "Let's go and change your official uniform first." Ren Baqian looked at Xiong Pai in front of him. Even after throwing a 2 to 3 ton stone a few times, he didn't even break a sweat. After bringing Xiong Pai out, Ren Baqian felt that he didn't have to worry about being hit by people when he walked. With such a guy behind him, no one would be blind enough to bump into him. Xiong Pai's physique was rather terrifying for the people of Dayo. He was the kind that would attract sidelong glances wherever he went. Julian district basically had more yamen offices and very few residences and shops. Ren Baqian directly brought Xiong Pai to Gujiazhai district. There were more residences there and it should be easier to find a shop for changing clothes. Just as he entered the main street of Gujiazhai, he saw a shaved ice shop at the side. There were many people sitting inside and they were all there to avoid the summer heat and eat shaved ice. This was still in the morning. If it was in the afternoon there would be more people. Qingshan. Ren Baqin went in and shouted. Sigh, Sir Ren. Sure. Qingshan raised his head and shouted. The dust on the roof beam kept falling. Lower your voice, don't be so loud. Ren Baqin rubbed his ears and said, Give me 2 bowls of shaved ice, any fruit. Then he found an empty table and sat down. Sit here. Ren Baqin patted the stool beside him. Xiong Pai shook his head and said, I'd better not sit. Sit, I said so. Ren Baqin insisted. There was no reason for him to stand while he was sitting. He still needed his protection from now on. Seeing that Ren Baqin insisted, Xiong Pai slowly sat down. Crack. Chapter 75. Ren Baqin stayed in the Honglu Bureau for 2 days and more or less understood the people and rules there. During this period he found out that Xiong Pai lived in a courtyard not far from the Honglu Bureau. Those outsiders were usually arranged to stay there. Xiong Pai loitered around the courtyard and could definitely play a role in stabilizing the situation. During this period Ren Baqin made a trip back to Earth. When he came back he took 300 song poems, and sat in the Honglu Bureau. When he had nothing to do he would recite song poems. At least, he had nothing to do and was still in a state of idleness. Xiong Pai followed Ren Baqin wherever he went. When Ren Baqin was reciting song poems, Xiong Pai would immediately sit on the ground and start snoring. Ren Baqin wished he could stuff socks into Xiong Pai's mouth. Deputy, someone's here. On the afternoon of his first day back from Earth, Ren Baqin was pondering how to stuff Xiong Pai's mouth when a loud voice came from outside. Who's that? Ren Baqin couldn't react for a moment. He said he's called Mr. Emptiness. The person who came in was one of the guards at the entrance. His name was Qi Sheng. He came from the same village as the original deputy Qi Ji. There was another guard called Qi Heng who was also at the entrance. Mr. Emptiness? Ren Baqin immediately reacted. These were the people who came to celebrate the Empress's birthday. Xiong Pai, get up and follow me to take a look. Ren Baqin kicked Xiong Pai's waist twice. It felt like he was kicking a rock. He brought the sleepy Xiong Pai to the entrance and saw 4 pretty young ladies in colorful clothes carrying a palanquin. When the 4 ladies saw him, they grabbed a handful of flower petals from their waist pockets and scattered them into the sky. Who's coming? Ren Baqin stood at the entrance and looked at this scene. He had a bad premonition. Mr. Emptiness has arrived, the young lady in front shouted delicately and scattered another handful of flower petals. Please follow me in to register. Leave the palanquin outside. Ren Baqin looked at her awkwardly. What was she trying to do? Cough, cough. A series of coughing sounds came from within the palanquin. Soon after, the curtain was lifted, and a young man wearing a silver silk robe walked out. His face was covered with a layer of powder and his lips were green. His appearance was passable, but this sickly posture that seemed like it would be blown away by a gust of wind was no longer just a sign of emptiness, it was clearly a sign of kidney deficiency. Young master kidney deficiency, right? Follow me. With his hands behind his back, Ren Baqin turned around and walked in expressionlessly. Cough, cough. It's young master emptiness, young master emptiness. Young master emptiness quickly explained. I'm just joking, Mr. Emptiness. Ren Baqin didn't even turn his head. Cough, cough, cough. To be able to throw a piece of soft paper like a dart, what kind of technique did he have? This was only the first person and he did not know what kind of people would come after him. He was afraid that this task would be more troublesome than what he had originally thought. If there were many of these people, it would be difficult to deal with them without using force to suppress them. Chapter 76. Ren Baqin strolled back with Xiong Pai. He deeply felt that this job might not be as easy as he had previously thought. Just the fact that Mr. Emptiness's palanquin was carried by the 4 young ladies who were able to carry the palanquin all the way to Lan City showed that they were definitely not ordinary people. He fiddled with the golden page in his hand. It really looked like a pocket-sized golden book. Taking a closer look, he realized that there were words carved on each page. It was a pity that he couldn't understand what was written. Just as he returned to the entrance of the Honglu Bureau, he saw a young man wearing a dirty robe and carrying a book on his back. He was talking to Qi Heng and Qi Sheng. It was the kind that Ning Kaichen carried in a Chinese ghost story. It was used to store the 4 books and 5 classics. There was a piece protruding from the top to block the sun during the day and also to block the rain during the rain. No one knew what they were talking about, but Qixing suddenly took a step forward, scaring the young man so much that he almost fell to the ground. What's going on? Ren Baqin asked as he approached. Deputy? Both of them turned around and greeted him with cupped hands. This is. He said he came to celebrate His Majesty's birthday, Qixing said. Ren Baqin sized him up. That young man was about 16 or 17 years old and had a tender face. Ren Baqin didn't know what kind of family would actually allow him to cross the border and come to Dayo. His body was a little dirty. He didn't know how long it had been since he last bathed. His robe was covered in dust. Are you the deputy here? The young man asked curiously. Ren Baqin nodded. I am. What, you don't look like one? The young man nodded honestly. It doesn't look like it. You will be beaten for being so honest. Ren Baqin looked at him from the corner of his eyes. I'm sorry. I meant that you don't look like someone from Dayo, the young man quickly said. You came by yourself? Yes, the young man said. Come in with me and register yourself. Ren Baqin waved his hand and walked into the courtyard with his hands behind his back. How should I address you? Ren Baqin asked casually. Surname Ning, given name Kaichen. Ning Kaichen? Ren Baqin suddenly turned his head to look at Ning Kaichen. His neck almost turned 180 degrees, scaring Ning Kaichen who was behind him. Sir, it's Ning Kaichen, what's wrong? Is Xiaoqian doing well? Ren Baqin put on a fake smile and didn't know what to think. I've just met young Master Kidney Deficiency and now there's Ning Kaichen. This world is really a coincidence and it's a small one. Who is little Qian? Ning Kaichen was at a loss. Perhaps you will meet them in the future, Ren Baqin said. When he returned to the room it was still a mess. The broken table lay on the floor, and there were many broken pieces scattered around. Fill in this form. This kind intention was really touching. Ren Baqin brought him to his residence. It was a courtyard that was connected to Mr. Emptiness's. You can stay here for the time being, Ren Baqin said. Thank you very much, deputy. I can't thank you enough, Ning Kaichen said. He felt a little regretful that he couldn't continue to brag. I'm just doing my job. If there's anything you can look for me at the Honglu Bureau. If I'm not around, look for someone else, Ren Baqin instructed. After all, he didn't look like he was very good at fighting. Of course this was hard to say. After all, he had traveled a long way to get here. Bragging skills alone might not always be useful. This Ning Kaichen might be an expert in disguising himself as a pig to eat a tiger. Ren Baqin waved his hand at Ning Kaichen and brought Xiong Pai back. When he passed by the courtyard where Mr. Emptiness lived, he took a glance inside. The sedan chair was still there, but he didn't see the 4 women who were carrying it. They should be in the house. After returning to the Honglu Bureau, he didn't encounter anything else. He sat there and recited the song CI until the sky turned dark. When he estimated that it was about time, he sent Xiong Pai back and strolled to the Qin medicine shop alone. Now that he was wearing his official uniform, he wouldn't encounter any trouble walking on the streets. Previously he mentioned that as long as he wore this uniform, it would represent that he was an official of Dayo. Even if he didn't look like an aboriginal, the aboriginals would still treat him as one. Being able to stroll around by himself without 2 burly bodyguards made Ren Baqin feel rather comfortable. There weren't many people in the Qin medicine shop. When Qin Zixing saw Ren Baqin, he was a little surprised and asked, Mr. Ren, are you an official in Dayo? Just a nominal position in the Honglu Bureau. Ren Baqin smiled. You are wearing a secondary class, rank 6 official uniform. It shouldn't be as simple as a nominal position. Qin Zixing laughed. Ren Baqin knew that the Honglu Bureau's deputy was a primary class, rank 6 official. However, seeing that Qin Zixing could tell at a glance, Ren Baqin asked him about the differences between official uniforms. Every rank of official had a different uniform. I've learned a lot. Ren Baqin cupped his hands in obeisance. He only knew a little about these things that everyone in Dayo, especially in Lan City, knew about. Chapter 77. After reading various treatises on typhoid and diseases, to Qin Zixing for an hour, Ren Baqin left the Qin family's shop, strolled around the streets and found a 2-story restaurant. He wanted to see how the food here tasted. After being here for so many days, he had always eaten in the Beast Park and had not had the opportunity to eat outside. Ren Baqin saw that there were quite a lot of people inside. When he entered, it was quiet inside. There were a few bald burly men at each table and all of them looked over. There were also a few heroic-looking women. They were all ordinary aboriginals. If an ordinary person encountered such a scene, his legs would probably go soft. Imagine if you entered a restaurant and all the people inside were 200 to 300 kilograms of burly men. Moreover, all of them were bald and looked at you fiercely. Most people would just turn around and leave. Rinpoche had seen a lot of such scenes in Dayo these days. He was somewhat used to it and did not mind. When the others saw the official robe that he was wearing, they all turned around and acted as if nothing had happened. They ate the meat in big mouthfuls, chatted loudly, and were extraordinarily lively. Rinpoche found a table in the corner and sat down. The lights in front of him dimmed and a burly man appeared in front of him. "Sir, what do you want to eat?" Rinpoche tilted his head and looked at the other party. The tone and expression of the other party did not seem to be asking him what he wanted to eat, but more like asking him how he wanted to die. Rinpoche sighed. With regards to these people, he felt helpless. Would it kill him to smile? "What's your specialty?" "Sir, we're good at everything here. As long as one has eaten it, no one would say that it's not delicious," the burly man immediately replied. Rinpoche sighed again. In his ears, the meaning of the burly man's words was, "No one would dare to say that it's not delicious." "Give me 2 of your specialty dishes and a pot of wine," Rinpoche said. "All right." The expression and tone of the burly man finally became more lively. He shouted to the back, 2 specialty dishes and a pot of wine. While Rinpoche waited for the dishes, he listened to the conversations around him. He did not need to listen to them. The loud voices of the Dayo people made it impossible for him to not listen to them. They talked about how grains and noodles were expensive nowadays, which stronghold had a fight with another stronghold, which stronghold had injured a few people during hunting, and which family's wife had severely injured a man. They were no different from ordinary citizens in China. At most, they were a little more boorish, bad-tempered, fierce-looking, stronger, more powerful, and would pick a fight with others whenever they had nothing to do. Rinpoche felt that there was still quite a big difference between them, but in essence they were pretty much the same. Of course, there were also those who scolded the merchants of various countries, saying that salt and cloth were expensive, and that they didn't even pay much for furs. Rinpoche suddenly felt that the world had become a lot more lively after listening to these family gossip. Life was supposed to be like this. Full of family trifles, haggling over every ounce. It was not like the palace that he entered and exited every day, which was quiet, cold, and solemn. Not long after, the dishes were served. It was a plate of steamed mutton and a plate of sauce. It was unknown what was used to make the sauce, but it was a little spicy. However, it covered up a lot of the mutton's odor. Tasted pretty good. The other plate was a stewed fish. It was very simple, with only salt and something similar to ginger. However, the fish was tender and tasty. The wine was relatively inferior. It tasted bland and was very turbid. Rinpoche sat there and listened to the bustle around him. He unhurriedly ate half of the dishes and drank all the wine. He actually felt a little tipsy. "Shopkeeper, bill please," Rinpoche shouted. "Sir, 80 copper coins." That burly man appeared in front of Rinpoche again. Rinpoche took out a piece of silver and threw it on the table. "Keep the change." "Thank you, sir." The burly man grinned. His facial expression became even more ferocious, but Rinpoche felt that he was more pleasing to the eye. He got up and left the restaurant. Rinpoche strolled toward the direction of the palace as if he was taking a stroll. Before he reached the palace, he heard a loud noise in front of him, followed by loud laughter. What happened again? Rinpoche was curious and quickened his pace. When he was about to reach the plaza, he finally saw the scene in front of him clearly. The surroundings were dark, but the plaza in front of the palace was brightly lit. He saw more than 20 soldiers standing in a circle with torches in their hands. In the middle were 2 men and a woman. Opposite the 3 of them was a burly man holding a long saber. He wore leather armor on his chest and left shoulder. The laughter came from the burly man holding the long saber. As for the 2 men and the woman opposite him, the 2 men were using long swords while the woman was using a pair of short sabers. The 3 of them obviously couldn't care less about the surrounding soldiers. All their attention was focused on the burly man in front of them. "Hand over Long Wanli's corpse. You have already killed him. Why won't you let us take his corpse away? We just want to bring his corpse back." The woman shouted angrily. Come. Let me test your skills. If you can withstand 10 moves from me, I will let you leave. If you can kill me, I will let you take my corpse away. I guarantee that no one will seek revenge on you. If you can't withstand 10 moves from me, you will also be buried here." The burly man held the saber and laughed wildly.